Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion. We're really excited to have you here today. And I'm personally really excited to be talking about this film because when I watched it the first time and the second time, what really struck me was the fact that often with climate change stories, it's very alienating and you feel like it's almost impersonal, right? But with this story, it was obviously very science focused, but it also had these stories of people who in real time were experiencing dramatic loss because of climate change. So I think it's an incredible representation of a new generation of storytelling, really. And I'm so excited to be here with you guys to talk more about it. But before that, before we get into the exciting questions, I'd love to introduce our panel today. We have Orlando von Einsiedel, who is an Academy Award-winning director of From Devil's Breath, known for films like Virunga, which is one of my favorite films ever, White Helmets, and Learning to Skateboard in a War Zone if you're a girl. We also have Professor Tom Crowther, who is an ecologist, chair of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and founder of the Restore Platform, an online platform to facilitate global restoration, which was represented as an Earthshot Prize finalist here at COP. And then we have Sofia Carmo, who is a restoration champion who you've all seen in the film so far, who's been working across rural Portugal to implement restoration strategies and sustainable forestry processes to combat climate change. And we have Mona Lisa, who is a restoration organizer, utilizing the Restore platform that Tom started for work across Indonesia where seasonal fires are an increasingly prevalent climate change issue. She's based in Borneo right now, where climate-driven flooding is a huge issue. So starting with you, Orlando, thanks so much for sharing your film with us today. I'd love to ask you, I've watched some of your films over the years and they've tackled everything from armed wildlife conflict in the Congo and wildlife stories to gender equity in Afghanistan. Were you actively looking to tell a climate change story? How did that process really come about?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching the film, and it's great to be on this panel. I think as a filmmaker, as a father to a young child, as a concerned citizen, I mean, I think I'm always looking to possibly tell stories about the climate emergency that we're all going through. It's the biggest existential crisis we're all facing. I think you sort of touched on it though, Malika, that telling stories about climate change is actually really tough. It's a diffuse, sort of almost nebulous concept that the antagonists, the bad guys, they're hard to pinpoint, and all of us are implicated in some way. And also, I think until recently, it's been very difficult to show, to really show sort of the climate emergency in action. I think that's changed a little bit in the last few years, but it's been hard. So these are difficult stories to tell in ways that engage people, that draw people in. But we're always looking for ways to do that. And at Grain Media, the company which I founded, we even have a climate change focused hub, just looking for those types of stories. In this case, Chloe Leland, one of the producers of this film, she came across Tom and Tom's colleagues' work, and I think for us it was a wow. This is a really fascinating approach and work that they're doing. It's tangible. It feels like everybody could be part of it. It's understandable. It was different and ultimately felt simple and obviously solutions focused. So we thought that was a really interesting way in to tell a story about what's happening. And as any filmmaker knows, getting access to a story is one of the most important parts. So we began by writing to Tom and his team, and this was at a point I think that everyone was writing to them saying, "Wow, we love your work." And to begin with, they sort of, "Okay, right, yes, another person from the media wanted to get in touch. What why should we give you loads of time?" And I think we were very persistent and kept knocking on the door until I think they got fed up of us. And then in talking with Tom and the team, we also learned about their work of looking at restoration in areas of land which degraded, and that began a conversation about Portugal and fires. And I suppose that's the sort of jumping off point for the project.
I love that. Persistence always pays when you're a filmmaker. Tom, right before our call, I was looking into some of your research, and I think what I found really blew my mind was the fact that our planet can literally support like nearly 2.5 billion additional acres of forest without shrinking cities and without shrinking agricultural land. And please correct me on those facts if I've gotten them wrong. But the idea that forests could absorb more than a third of historic emissions that we all, confronting the manifestations of those emissions. I think that's crazy, right? And I think through the film and through your work, you've laid out a roadmap for ecosystem restoration. And I think right now, this week, this month, we're thinking about it so much more given COP and given the conversations about ecosystem restoration. But, so often when a big summit like this happens, we're all talking about it. And then boom, we're back to our day-to-day lives. We're living in cities and doing our thing. What do you, as someone who's been at the very front lines of this, hope to see after COP?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think you're right. This COP has been, I would say, by far the most optimistic COP. It's been the one where incredible country level pledges on stopping deforestation and restoring large areas of nature were really central to it. And I think the reason it was so optimistic is because nature felt like it was at the heart of this COP. This was the COP of nature. And that hasn't always been the case until very recently. Very, very recently, COP was, understandably about the energy sector, the transport sector, technologies to limit emissions, which are all unbelievably important. But ultimately, the science is now abundantly clear. We cannot reach 1.5 without nature. And even if we could build a cooler planet without nature, we wouldn't want to live on that anyway. It wouldn't be a livable planet anyway. So nature, this COP really put nature at the front and center. And the pledges were incredibly exciting. I think 30% is the magic number with nature. We need to prevent deforestation to contribute 30% to our emissions reductions. We need to restore nature. And yes, you're right about, there's this huge area of land available to restore nature. And if we can do that, we can capture up to 30% of the excess carbon that's already been emitted. So that's drawdown and limited emissions. And if we could protect 30% of the land surface, we can maintain the ecological integrity that's necessary to keep all life on our planet alive. So it's very exciting. I'm really excited about the commitments, but you are also very correct that it's so scary that these could be empty promises. And that is where the politicians and the governments and the corporations involved need to connect with the technology to make sure we can track every single ton of carbon, every single plant, and that we absolutely have the technology to do it, but also to connect with the people who are driving it on the ground, people like Sophia, who are the sort of climate champions for all of us, and really try to do this right, because there's the big danger of people thinking, great, we can engage in nature, we'll plant a load of trees, and we'll just bang a load of carbon in the ground. And that would be doing the same devastating mistake we've made before, where we just focus on carbon and ignore the nature and the people that depend on it. It's got to be a bottom-up movement, like the movement that Mona Lisa's sort of driving in Indonesia. It's got to be thousands of collective local initiatives, empowering people and the local biodiversity they depend on. And so that's, I think, why this film, it really does a great job. Orlando's done an amazing job at sort of showing that path through the difficult challenges with adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change and responsible social action.
I completely agree. And I think that it's interesting that you mentioned corporations, because it does feel like right now, every single company out there, a lot of companies out there want to start planting trees, and everyone's talking about it. But if you look at the essence of it, so much of that is monoculture, and so much of that isn't really good for our planet. I mean, these plants they're not just bad because they're really flammable, but they're also sequestering less carbon than, diverse species of trees and plants. And I think, Sophia, a lot of your work in Portugal and beyond has focused on helping people understand that it's not just about planting trees. And tell me about what your thoughts are on this, and how do you get people to believe in this and do it at the grassroots level?
Well, it's a very difficult work to do, because we try to uproot eucalypts and plant native trees, and native trees don't give money quickly. But the story, our bad story, is that eucalypts provoke that in too much people. And in 2070, most people die because the eucalyptus monoculture. But today, all the days, we try to pass the message, the positive message that everyone have important paper in this change. And always we try to convince the owners that how is important to do the change and plant native trees. Our difficulty is that eucalypts give money quickly and biodiversity don't give money quickly. So we think the passage could pass more easy if the owners be compensated for the service of the ecosystems. You know, if I can tell the owner that if you plant oak trees, cork trees, or other species, they don't receive direct money, but all the people globally, everyone could be helped with this attitude. So it's difficult. After the fire, we do lots of interventions in repairing galleries, planting native trees, because that trees are trees that promote the resilience of the forest, protect people, give life to nature and give life to people. I don't know if I can, and it's very important, that perception. And it's not only my work, it's only the work of everyone around of the world, because the first message that we really want to pass is important to act now. Me, Sophia, you, Malaika, Orlando, Tom, Mona Lisa, everyone. It's not time to wait. It's important that we are activists and not observers. Everyone has to do something. It's the time. And I'm only one, but it's not impossible. It's possible if everyone are engaged with this compromise.
Completely, I reckon with that, because I think that one of the things that you did bring about is that it is a collective movement. I mean, planting trees intrinsically is hard. I mean, you need to have millions and millions of trees in every country. But I think, Sophia, you have kind of endured personal loss through this process of, you know, being in the place that you were when the fires hit Portugal. But you've also been working at the very front lines of science and getting people to understand, you know, regenerative agriculture and regenerative forestry. But do you think that, you know, this film and these conversations that are happening all across the world, more now than ever before, can actually inspire change, not just in Portugal, but beyond?
That's my hope, because it's very important that everyone are engaged with this compromise. And the Restore platform could help so much in this engagement, because like you said, it's not only plant trees. We must plant trees in the right place, in the right time, because we have so much problems with the monoculture of eucalyptus, but we have so many problems with the other species that come to our forest, and after the fire, they have invasive comportments. You know, so in this time, our biodiversity is fraught from because of these species, and that's another of this. This is another problem. And with the Restore in the land, with the scientific knowledge that Thomas passed us, and this networking that Restore construct. We can decide based on the information that Restore give us. I don't know if you understand me, but I think the Restore is fantastic, because everyone we is a great tool because science and knowledge are there. And even the politics can be used the Restore to take decisions. You know, so and even the policy or everything we are discussing now. I think the most important thing is our conscience, our individual conscience, because if everyone understand that sometimes the direct money is not so important because we put in cause the next generations. Well, in this time I have to think in my daughter and my nephews, because I think I'm going to repeat again. If we don't act now, we're going to lose this battle, and we're going to lose our life, human life. And because biodiversity is who supports the relations in the ecosystem, and Tom, as a scientist, can explain better than me that without the networking of the forest ecosystem, we can survive. We depend of the biodiversity, and we don't valorize it. Maybe if someone tell how much cost the biodiversity, probably change is an equal battle, economic and environment.
Yeah, and I think you do bring up an important point, right? Climate change is no longer just this obscure environmental issue. It is existential. It is something that's going to determine our lives and the lives of millions and millions of people who will come after us. And I think it's incredible that we have these beacons of hope. The fact that the Restore platform is helping and facilitating incredible forestry entrepreneurs, if I may, like you, Mona Lisa, and you, Sophia, is already hope for me as someone who's living here right now on our planet. But at the same time, the fact that we have about 2.6 million pounds of heat-trapping carbon being emitted into our atmosphere almost every single second, that's terrifying. That scares me at my very core. And I think many parts of the global south, parts of this part of the world, are being impacted in scary ways. And Mona Lisa, you know this. I'd love to understand from your perspective, how is climate-driven weather changes, like how is that impacting where you are? And how do you see restoration efforts as a step in the right direction to protect these communities on the front lines?
Thanks, Malaika. First of all, it's really, really hard to be not emotional to see this movie. After a few minutes, I feel like, oh my God, I don't know if I can still talk in a normal way after I've seen this. But anyway, yeah, in a big international event like this, we talk about the dramatic or the huge number of deforestation rates or the temperatures of our Earth, right? But in the other part of the world, millions of people, we simply do not have time to talk about these numbers anymore or even see to those numbers. Simply because we don't have time. What we've just seen in this movie about the wildfire in Portugal, we also experience it here every year in Indonesia. We've seen it also in Austria, and you guys all mentioned it happens all over the world. And remember that this is only one of the many problems caused by deforestations. So yeah, it's it's a bit hard to talk now. But anyway, recently I just called, actually yesterday evening, my dad just called me and telling me that we have to move, we have to evacuate all of the family because our house was flooded back in my village in Central Kalimantan, in Central Borneo in Indonesia. And I do not recall this memory. I never seen anything like this before. So yeah, it's really hard. It's the fire, it's flooding. People lose their livelihood. That's what we're facing on the ground level. And I think this is why, or this is when the reforestation effort is taking part. In Indonesia and Uganda, Fair Ventures, we are working with smallholder farmers to replanting or to reforest degraded areas. We have millions and millions of open areas, degraded soil, very poor, no nutrition. We try to work in this kind of soil with lightwood timber species. This kind of species that it has we call it pioneer species. So in degraded areas, you plant them, and then the roots will bring back the fertility of the soil to bring nutrient. And then between the trees, we can plant any other crops. We can also plant any other trees. This is what we're trying to do in the ground level in Indonesia and Uganda. And what I'm trying to say is I've seen the people that I work in my team in the Ventures in Uganda, in Indonesia, and Germany. I've seen many other organizations also doing what we're doing. We have something like Restore now, platform that could help us in many aspects of our restorations efforts. So I have a really good feeling about it. It's scary, but it's a big hope. I'm sure we can do this all together as long as we want to work together, as long as all the politicians, as long as the corporations, all the people who are also working in the industry, willing to sit together with the scientists, with the people who work on the ground level, with the farmers. And Orlando, of course, people who spread the messages. I have a really good feeling that we can do this. Thank you, Malaika.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Mona Lisa. And I think you're right. I mean, we do need an intersectional approach to this. We cannot just have scientists publishing papers or filmmakers making documentaries or, farmers doing their thing without people collaborating. And I think this project is an example of that. Orlando, coming back to you, I think it's interesting that in terms of the storytelling strategy, right, this film very much has an appeal to anyone. Like, I think any audience member across the world would be able to connect with it. But very often, I mean, if you look at the media ecosystem right now, we've been focusing so much on stories of infrastructure-based solutions to climate change or how big tech is going to save us all. But the fact that you focused on a nature-based solution is incredible. Do you think that with this film and with other films that are in this realm, do you think that storytelling can help us to create a world where we see nature-based solutions as the future and not just as like a side solution that we can bank on if everything else fails?
Well, I suppose that the small, I mean, as Mona Lisa said, the small contribution I can try and make in this area is to share stories. And I think film is a really interesting part of the toolkit for driving social change if you focus on stories that have difficult issues at their heart. And there's a few reasons for that. One is it's got mass appeal. Another is film can galvanize people around an issue. This panel today and our audience is, I suppose, an example of that. These things are short, relatively short. You can, if you want to, it's difficult if you want to get politicians engaged in a difficult issue to get them to read a book or a massive scientific paper. But a film, people can generally devote an hour or two to watch something and learn about a new thing. And the film can also it can create an empathy bridge between, me sitting here at home and somebody on the other side of the world. And that's, yes, of course, a book can do that, but a film can do it very quickly if the storytelling is done personally and we follow a sort of first person narrative. And then I suppose lastly, film can also hopefully, if it's done right, can go beyond empathy. It can show us, it can connect us to people, but can also show the structural problems underlying an issue and possibly some of the solutions. Saying all of that, the film, you could make a film about the most important issue in the world, and unless it was engaging and I use this word quite lightly, but entertaining as a piece of filmmaking, it's not going to get a wide audience. So you need to work hard to do that. And when it comes to climate change, the climate emergency, there are obviously lots of ways you could approach filmmaking. So you could use lots of statistics and interviews about science, or I suppose the way we've always made films is to try and tell smaller personal stories. Now that might be a small personal story of a scientist or a survivor of something, but that's sort of been our way to engage people, in situations and have people learn about something, but then you feel something and you feel that connection, and maybe that is that at the end of watching that film, you might be more inclined to to do something about it. And lastly, I should say that you can't just make a film and then just release it into the ether. That doesn't normally have an impact. You have to work hard with a film, and normally it has to be an impact campaign or an impact strategy related to that film in order for that film to have some sort of positive impact. And that's as an individual, I you only have films take a long time. It's slow filmmaking, and you only have a certain number of films in your life. And I've tried, and certainly the team and the collaborators I work with, we've tried really hard to make films about things that we care about, to films that are important, because that's how we want to use our time.
And I love the fact that you mentioned, the impact campaign. That follow through is so important. And we've been talking so much more about that. But I think with your film and with more environmental documentaries that I've watched recently, I've noticed that the impact also comes through the way the story is told, right? The way you integrate science. Throughout your film, you had Tom talking about things that were really data-driven and big picture. But at the end of the day, you connected that to the audience. You connected that to people who were at the grassroots level. Whether that's Virunga or whether that's this documentary, how have you been able to tell stories about complex environmental issues in a way that is accessible not just to the audience member, but to people in positions of power? I think this time that we're in right now, COP and beyond, we need to be telling stories to the right chamber, the right echo chamber sometimes. How do you do that? How has your impact campaign helped with that?
Well, I think at its heart, at its most simple, there's obviously lots of different layers and elements, but at its most simple, I think all the films which I'm drawn to, they're about people that are changing the world around them. They're about people that, in one way or another, have decided that the status quo is not acceptable, and that they want to stand up and do something about that. And that might be rescue workers in Syria, it might be park rangers in Eastern Congo, or it might be Sophia in Pedrógão Grande, or Tom and his team in Switzerland. And I think, if I just talk about myself, you turn on the news every day. There's so much negative news. There's so many problems in the world. It's very easy to become numb to that and just think, what can any of us do? It's so depressing. And I have to believe that, Sophia was talking about this, I have to believe that the world, we can change the world. The world can be better. And I want to share stories of incredible people that are doing that, people that inspire me and make me believe and give me hope and faith in people. And sharing those stories, that's, there's no magic. It's just sharing stories of incredible people. And that's been a route to get films seen by politicians and influential people.
That's amazing. And coming to one of the incredible people in your film, Tom, I think while reforestation might be one of the best solutions that we have to store carbon, I think it makes ecological sense, but we're increasingly seeing a world where governments and companies are invested in it because it makes business sense as well, because it's something that is helpful from a revenue perspective. Have you been seeing that through all of the projects that Restore is kind of helping out across the world? Have you been seeing that as a driver of sorts?
That is a really key part of this, because as you said, restoration and conservation are ecological challenges, but they're also social and economic challenges, as the movie showed so well. And when we look across the thousands and thousands of projects, as you would imagine, the one thing that stands out as the projects that are most successful are the ones that find that the solutions to make them economically sustainable, as Sophia is trying so hard to do in her region, figuring out that challenge and figuring out overcoming the challenges to become economically sustainable. Once you do that, then nature will propagate, because, the connection of people and nature is the strongest thing. But I think the challenge is it can take some time to get there. Restoration is incredibly, incredibly hard. You need to understand the ecology and the social context. And one thing that I worry about a lot is, as you mentioned, governments and companies, starting to get involved in nature conservation and restoration. And the first thing they did is plant a load of trees. And now we're all going, plant a load of monocultures. And we're all going, no, that is the opposite of what we need. And they go, okay, right, fine. We'll find some projects to support. And the next phase I'm really worried about is those people are going to start investing. investing in a very narrow range of incredibly successful projects. So there's a few, a lot of the big NGOs and, they have some wonderful, well-funded, successful projects that have proven success in the past. And because companies are so scared of going to the wrong, supporting the wrong project or going to a project that will fail, and investors are so scared of losing their money or wasting their donation or wasting their impact, all the money is getting funneled to 10 or 11 massive, amazing projects. And we don't need 10 spectacular projects on the planet. Sorry, please. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll be 1 minute. We don't want 10 very well-funded projects. We need hundreds of millions of bottom-up local initiatives. And so what I really want companies and governments to start doing is finding those local projects, finding those local initiatives, support as many as physically possible, and expect that many will succeed, but many will fail. And the failures are going to tell us so much more information that we can use to keep growing the movement and keep improving. And those failures, once we find them, we should invest more energy and money in those failures, not give up on them. At the moment, when restoration projects are funded, and if they fail, which is so common at the beginning, they are then encouraged to hide and hide the data, hide the information, and for fear of being shamed away. We need to be facilitating and supporting hundreds of millions of these efforts and learning from the failures and celebrating the failures to move forwards towards success.
I agree. And I think so often with whether it's documentary films or whether it is forest conservation, investing in that failure initially helps people to believe in themselves and believe in the idea, and then kind of just take it to the next level and the next stage of it. So I think that's incredible that you brought that up. One of the questions that I had was that, and I also see that we have some audience members who are curious about this. We have Stephanie who's asking, how do filmmakers, and I'd like to extend this question to you as well, Tom, but how do filmmakers and ecologists measure the impact of their work? How do you know that a restoration project has been successful? How do you know that a film about restoration has been successful? So maybe Tom can answer the ecology part of it, and then Orlando can answer the film part of it.
Really good question. Yeah. I think, that's a really good question. I think ultimately we need to, bringing transparency is at the core of that question. And we have the technology to bring transparency on the ecological side now. We need to be monitoring how these thousands of initiatives are, how vegetation is recovering, how carbon and biodiversity are recovering, and how they're collectively growing together. But the harder thing to manage, to monitor and bring transparency to is the social impact. And I think maybe that's where Orlando can speak a lot more. But what we desperately need to do is build those networks again, like Mona Lisa's talking about, so that we can learn about the social and economic changes that are happening as a result of movements like this. And with that kind of information, I would, as a scientist and the scientific community, would love to sort of receive that kind of information back, so that we can start understanding where the economic successes are happening and where more work is needed, where more energy and money and financing is needed to support the move towards a sustainable future.
And then from a film perspective, I mean, there's there are sort of classic ways to measure the success of a film on a film's own right, in terms of how many people view it, and maybe how many press articles there are about it, how many people maybe don't view the film, they view the trailer, they learn about the issue. But this film and the impact campaign associated with it is very much driven towards focusing attention on the Restore platform that Tom and his colleagues have set up. So it's too early to say right now that what that's saying. The film's at the very beginning of its life, but if in a year's time, we'd hope that the film has had a measurable impact on the amount of people that have learned about Restore, the amount of people that have engaged with it, the amount of people that have used its tools to do things locally. And so that's certainly what we hope that the film can do in its lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things about restoration efforts across the world, and I think the storytelling also has an impact with that is the way that communities view that, right? Not just communities at COP and communities who have access to television, but communities at the very front lines. And so often restoration gets so much flack because in the process of restoring land, you often have communities that depend on it in extractive ways sometimes, who are moved out without, adequate remuneration and adequate, compensation. How do you figure out ways to make reforestation equitable? How do you make it make sense for the communities who are there before that future forest is created? I think Sophia and Mona Lisa, if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. You're muted, Sophia.
That's our big challenge, is that one, because in this time we don't have any way to compensate the owners from doing the good thing. And we are working and with the Victims Association and with Tom to found some company to do a pilot project to prove that native forests can be values, and in the time that the native forests don't give quickly money, we can give money to the owners to compensate the investment and the native forest. Because as Tom said and Orlando says, the social part is very difficult to, in the other way, restoring is not the same like constructing a building, because we know the steps that we have to do, how much it costs, how much the value, and how much how you gonna win with that investment. When we invest in forest, we don't have any sure. That is a risk. But and we read the documents, the scientific documents, but the soil, the water, the climate, and there's another variables that must be on the list that we can control. If we plant a native forest and with 5 years and then come a fire and all the investment go. I don't know if you understand. So it's very important to do a pilot project, a local project, to prove that it's possible to do. And it's important that the police are involved and engaged with this project. And it's so important that the companies that want to do the investment know that could be failed. It's a risk, but here in the land we're going to do our best to prove that it's possible, and we're going to do the best for this project go away.
Yeah, and I think with a pilot project, often it's also not just from an ecological perspective a way to make sure that it makes sense, but also from a community perspective. So often in different parts of the world, you see communities adding insights and adding some of their expertise and some of their local know-how to the process of reforesting.
Yes.
It's incredible the work that you're doing, Sophia and Mona Lisa, to make that happen. Mona Lisa, I was wondering, did you have similar experiences of seeing this where you are?
Yeah, 100% agree with Sophia. It's definitely not easy. There is no such a magic to do that. And Tom mentioned it earlier that reforestation effort could only be successful if it's working economically and socially. No compromise on that, right? So I think from the old perspective, what I've seen in Indonesia, the main cause of deforestation is the economic reasons such as giant monoculture plantations and mining activities, for example. And in these kind of economic systems, the local communities often left behind. Now, I think what's interesting in the reforestation effort is this mindset need to be changed. The local communities who live in that area, who live close by the forest, need to be the frontliner in this effort. Now, how are we going to make it happen? How are we going to make it work for them, both socially and economically? What we're trying in Indonesia with Fair Ventures is that we try to build a value chain for fast growing trees, because as we all know, wood is amazing carbon storage, right? And then what's amazing about it is it's not only a good storage of carbon when it's on the ground as a trees, but also when you bring it to your furniture, when you build your house. Now we start to see skyscrapers made out of wood. And how cool is that, right? So we see this as a big opportunity for afforestation effort. As more buildings made out of wood, we're also storing carbon, right? And then from the ground level, it's create a huge market for us. Here we want to connect the people on the ground, planting trees, fast-growing trees on degraded land. We have millions of them in Indonesia. And then we connect them to the wood processing company. Then this processing company will also work with the global market. This is how we see it works. This is the only way it could work. And then this is also the pilot project of Fairventures in Indonesia. We've been working for 5-6 years now. And then next year we're about to do the first harvesting season for the farmers. And then as Sophia said, we need to prove that this could work and this model is scalable. And then we can talk about impact. Thank you, Malika.
Thank you, Mona-Lisa. And I have a follow-up question based on what you've just mentioned. I think the fact that there are all these really innovative approaches to conservation coming out of your country is incredible. And it's not just Indonesia, it's not just India, it's not just Kenya, it's all across the world. But so often we just hear success stories from America and the UK and the countries that have a bigger seat at the table, right? And we had an audience member who's watching you right now ask, if there was a film to be made in Indonesia about restoration efforts, what is one or a couple of incredible aspects of the restoration process that Indonesia has been at the forefront of that you would say should be in that documentary?
Well, yeah, I would say I've seen so many people who are working in the ground level try to do like what we're trying to do with different approach sometimes, but definitely trying to do something, as just Sophia did in Portugal. Not everything is successful, not everything is a nice and sweet stories, but there is always something we can learn about it. Pick some. If you come to Kalimantan, contact us for ventures. If you come to another part of Indonesia, I can give you some contacts. Orlando, you're very welcome, by the way. So yeah, there are so many things. And Indonesia is a huge country. So we have so many forests. We have 17,000 islands. I've seen also many people, for example, working in ocean to tackle the same issues. In Borneo, we have people who are working on peatland restoration projects. It's all incredible stories. And we need more. Well, we need more stories to tell, and we need eye on us, on those people who are working on the ground level, and we need support. That's the only way.
You're right. And coming to the story, man, Orlando, tell me, in terms of the stories that we tell about restoration and just having healthier forests, I think it's so important to kind of pitch them as not just stories that are important from an ecological perspective, but because they're good for us and they help protect global public health and global lives, right? I mean, your film showed how messing up with the environment has very direct consequences on people's lives, people that we all love and care about. In terms of the stories that you hope to tell and that you hope to see other people telling, what are the aspects of climate change that you think need to be focused on that hasn't been done before so far?
Well, I think it's, there are lots of stories to be told, especially as things get worse, and to document that, obviously there's lots of forest fires that we're seeing all over the world. But I also think it's important to have solutions baked into the stories too, because it's just too much for all of us if we're just bombarded with all of the absolute worst aspects of it. It's important, of course, it's really important to witness what's happening and how the world is changing. And we need to be everyone needs to be made aware of that and regularly reminded. But we also need to bake into those stories ways that individuals can be inspired to do something after seeing that film and understand that it's not, there are ways to fix this. I think that's really important. So it's combining those two elements together, I think, is going to lead to films that drive impact and don't lead us all just to put our heads in the sand.
Absolutely. And I think we're nearing the end of this panel discussion. We have about 4 to 5 minutes left. I'd love it if, all three of you could share with us your roadmap for the future. What is one thing that someone who is an environmentalist or a business person or a government leader or an individual, and you can choose to focus on one of those, not all four, but what is something that one of those people, those individuals could do to help bolster and support restoration efforts in their country or across the world? How about we start with you, Sophia? I think you're muted again. Sorry, it happened.
Sorry. Like, I don't know if I understand the question. Could you please repeat?
Yeah. So basically what I was asking was, if you could tell someone out there, whether that's a policymaker or an individual or a business person, one way that they can support reforestation and restoration efforts.
Okay. I think for me it's simple to answer that questions. I invite all that people to come to a forest and stay, listen to sounds, pick up the soil, smell, feel the message that the native forest passes when you are there. Next, go to eucalyptus monoculture and do the same exercise. Then they're gonna, if they like nature, they're gonna feel the difference between what is forest and what is a plant trees. Okay, and that feeling when you are on the forest could help you to decide. I think who loves nature, probably Mona Lisa, understand what I'm saying. If it's great, it's good energy, good vibes. I even well, I don't have words. I invite you to do this, and the politics, the investors do the same exercise, and they're gonna see that if they do the investment on the native forest, they know where they are invested. Thank you.
Mona Lisa?
Thanks, Malaika. I think the old ways of thinking that economic and environment cannot work together, one of them needs to be sacrificed. And I think if you are one of those people who think that way, I think this is the right time for you to start to think a different way and start to open your eyes, open your ears, read, talk to people, because the solutions is there. Because I think we've seen it everywhere, that this kind of model where people and the planet can work together is possible. So I think, let's open more place or platforms where we can talk more about this kind of solutions. Thank you, Malaika.
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa. And you, Orlando, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm going to answer partly for Tom as well, I think, and say everyone listening to this, go to restore.eco and have a look at this platform. You can very simply, if you have a garden, you can draw around your garden, and it will tell you what trees are native to that region of the world, what trees you could plant there to sequester as much carbon as possible. It's fascinating. If you are lucky enough to have land, look at it, take it very seriously, and plant a load of trees. And of course, share. The film isn't available to watch online yet. It will be soon. But if you were interested in our conversation and you like the film, do share about it online, and then hopefully more people will watch it when it's available. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who's been a part of this and for your insights. I'm definitely going to walk away from this with a lot more to think about, and I'm going to be jumping on the Restore platform to check out my local backyard forest very, very soon. So thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone who's watching, stay tuned for the next session. It's going to be interesting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika. Thanks.
Planet Earth, home to a growing number of Homo sapiens and a whole lot of other creatures. It's a great place to live. But when it comes to the future of our small planet,
now to a dire warning about climate change.
Natural disasters like hurricanes or wildfires.
An unprecedented decline in nature threatening humanity.
6 mass extinction event is already well.
There's so much bad news about our planet, it's overwhelming. The fear that we're headed for a cliff puts most of us into a state of paralysis. The truth is, I've given up. And the odds are, so have you.
What are things that you're doing in your life to make an impact around climate change?
I mean, I like to, do my part when I can, like with my metal straw.
Going to the paper straws.
No plastic straws.
Paper straws versus plastic. Recycled straws. Every time I come here, I feel energized.
If recycling and paper straws are our only hope, we are in really big trouble. But what if there was another path? This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet and keep our species off the extinction list. In fact, the solution I'm talking about is right under our feet. And it's as old as dirt. We call it soil, earth, or ground. And due to its vast scale and its ability to sequester immense quantities of greenhouse gases, it could just be the one thing that can balance our climate, replenish our freshwater supplies, and feed the world. That's why some people are racing to save our soil, in hopes our soil just might save us.
I am a conservation agronomist. We get the soil right, we can fix a lot of our issues. Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy animal, healthy human, healthy water, healthy climate. This is what this is about today. Learning how the soil works and learning how to farm like nature does.
The message is simple, but getting that message out is difficult.
We have a social problem. We have an education issue. And until we get that right, we can't fix our ecological issues. I have been in NRCS for 31 years. It was kind of amazing to me as I was teaching all over the country. I'm going, wow, our producers don't really know how the soil works. They don't understand the basic ecological principles. Everything runs by carbon. We're built by carbon. The soil microbes run by carbon. Carbon is the driving engine. It runs the system.
But when it comes to the role of carbon in our world, there's a bit of confusion.
What is carbon dioxide?
It's comes from.
That's a trick question for me. You caught me off guard on that.
I guess that would be carbon and two molecules of whatever.
Something bad?
It's poison that you're breathing, and it will destroy you.
To be specific, carbon dioxide is a gas. We breathe it out, and plants breathe it in. We also make carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels. But carbon isn't bad. In fact, it's the basis for all life on Earth.
There's a tendency right now for us to be at war with carbon. Carbon's the bad guy, and I think this is a lost opportunity. Carbon's the good guy. We're carbon. I'm 16% carbon, and all of it came from eating vegetation and things that eat vegetation.
Plants use sunlight as energy, and they pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They turn it into a carbon fuel, and that's how they grow. But 40% of that carbon fuel, they send down to their roots. They're leaking it out in a very strategic way to soil microorganisms. Plants are feeding soil microorganisms carbon, and the soil microorganisms are bringing plants mineral nutrients. And in the process of all that, those soil microorganisms make a carbon glue out of that carbon fuel. And they make habitat in the soil. They make little pockets in the soil to control the flow of air and water. And that's one of the ways that carbon gets fixed in the soil.
In other words, soil has the unique ability to sequester carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's a big deal. And what's even more amazing? The soil contains an entire universe of life.
Here I went to years of college, and I took soil science. I didn't know. I really did not know how the soil worked. It's alive.
In every handful of healthy soil, there are more organisms than the number of people who've ever lived on planet Earth.
I believe in miracles. Where you from? You sexy thing, you.
And those organisms are processing organic matter that's in the soil and putting the nutrients into a form that the plant needs. Comparing the soil microbial diversity to the microbial diversity that we're now seeing inside the human organism. You have more bacterial cells in your body than you have human cells.
Yeah, we're about 1% human and 99% microbes. It's the truth.
The food that we eat, we actually chew and break that food material down into little bits that get eaten by the bacteria in our gut. When you eat kale, let's say, when you're eating kale, your body doesn't consume kale. The bacteria consume the kale. And you feed off of what the bacteria have processed and released by the consumption of that kale.
The key to health is eating dirt. And what I mean by that is we need to eat what's in the dirt that's transferred to the plants that then we eat and create health.
Taking care of the microbes in the soil is critical for human health. But spraying the soil with toxic chemicals, well, does something else.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Spraying the soil with toxic chemicals kills the very microbes we need to give us health and pull the carbon from the atmosphere. The more tilling that's done, the weaker the soil gets, and the more farmers feel compelled to use chemical sprays. This is the vicious cycle of industrial agriculture.
It takes more nitrogen now to raise a bushel of grain than it did in 1960.
Our chemical fertilizers mask the problem of degraded soils. Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil.
Today, our most common crops are genetically altered to resist the spraying of toxic pesticides. For example, the #1 crop in the United States, field corn, is almost entirely sprayed with glyphosate, a chemical suspected to cause cancer that's so oversprayed, it's found its way into our drinking water.
These chemicals, which were considered dangerous to begin with, are now being used at rates that would have been inconceivable 20 years ago.
Every year, for every American alive, 3 pounds of toxic chemicals are sprayed onto the food grown on our farms.
That goes into the soil, it goes into the water, it goes into our bodies. It's not just on the food you eat, it's everywhere.
Most of the agricultural industry's pesticides and herbicides transfer directly through breast milk to babies. There are over 200 peer-reviewed studies that correlate the spraying of these toxic chemicals to effects like ADD in children, pediatric cancers, and birth defects. That's why juries have begun to award billions of dollars in damages to people who contracted cancer after using glyphosate.
We know, for example, that glyphosate, which is also known as Roundup, has an effect on the gut microbiome that may lead to disturbances that can create disease, including cancer.
A big reason these chemicals make us sick is because just as toxic chemicals kill the microbes in the soil, they also kill the microbes in our bodies.
What I tell people is your body can handle acute stresses, but it cannot handle chronic stresses. Soil ecosystems the same way. If you keep dumping the fungicides, you keep dumping the herbicide, you keep dumping the insecticides, you keep doing the tillage, chronic stress, it doesn't function anymore.
Since chemical agriculture ramped up worldwide in the 1970s, we have lost 1/3 of the Earth's topsoil. But industrial agriculture isn't just harming our soils, it's also affecting something much larger.
The most massive tsunami, perfect storm is bearing down upon us. But fossil fuels, carbon, coal, and gas, are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. Now, because the fate of water and carbon are tied to soil organic matter, when we damage soils, you give off carbon. Carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
Healthy soils absorb water and carbon dioxide. But when we destroy soil, it releases water and carbon dioxide. This dries out the soil and turns it into dust. The process is called desertification. And how we deal with it could determine the fate of more than just our climate.
Desertification is a fancy word for land that is turning to desert. And this happens only when we create too much bare ground.
Soil and the plant and the climate are connected. If you don't have a living plant, you're going to have more evaporation. What we want is transpiration. When the moisture leaves through the plant, when it does that, it increases humidity, and when it increases the humidity, we have more rain. 60% of our rainfall comes from the ocean. But a lot of people don't realize 40% comes from small water cycles where our rain comes from inland. What's going on is we disrupted the small water cycles. That's when you have too much sensible heat coming off bare soil. You're having these huge vortexes of hot air going out. Instead of attracting the rain, it's pushing the rain clouds away.
Take 1 square meter of soil and make it bare, and I promise you, you will find it much colder at dawn and much hotter at midday than that same piece of ground if it's just covered with plant litter. You have changed the microclimate. Now, by the time you are doing that on more than half the world's land, you are changing macroclimate.
According to the United Nations, the world's remaining topsoil will be gone within 60 years. In other words, unless we find a way to save our soils, we have 60 harvests left.
Let's do that. Do a couple of demos.
The global scale of the problems we face may seem insurmountable. But in every fight that seems unwinnable, there are those who refuse to give up.
We're very fortunate to have Ray Archuleta with us today. Ray, as you can tell, is someone that has quite a bit of notoriety. He's got his own reality show. Now that doesn't happen. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ray. And Ray, we appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Ray. This is a supercomputer model by NASA. We're concerned of the red and purples being CO2. I want you to notice the dates. That is February, March. Now, what are we doing March, April? What do we do in modern agriculture in April? We are tilling. We're tilling the land. And look at the huge plumes of CO2. Look at the dates. May. Now, let's see what happens around June. Look at the colors change. Ladies and gentlemen, what is happening in June? Do you see how powerful the living plants are? Can you imagine if we had all our rangeland and all our cropland covered? A covered planet is a healthy planet.
Of course, he's an environmentalist and the editor of Draw Down, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. Please welcome Paul Hawken. Tell us why your plan is different and why it is the most comprehensive.
Well, it's very different because it's the first one ever.
And you cannot achieve drawdown without biosequestration. Biosequestration is using plants, trees, perennials, and techniques of grazing and farming to capture carbon and store it in the sink of the soil and retain it for decades, if not centuries.
What we did is map, measured, and modeled the 100 most substantive solutions to global warming. And what I mean by solutions, I mean things that are at hand. We know how to do it. They're scaling.
And if we continue to scale in a rigorous but reasonable way over 30 years, we can reverse global warming.
When you talk to people about this great technology that has existed for millions of years that takes carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it safely in the soil, and that it's called plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
If we are going to succeed in balancing our climate, we do need to switch to renewable energies. But none of that will alter the tremendous amount of carbon we've already put into the atmosphere. Since 1750, when the Industrial Revolution began, we've pumped about 1,000 billion tons, also known as gigatons, of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's called our legacy load of carbon. And even if we stopped all greenhouse gas emissions today, that legacy load of carbon will still be there.
That legacy load of carbon dioxide is still going to be warming the atmosphere for decades, if not centuries. So if all we talk about is reducing emissions, it's not enough.
If electric cars and solar panels aren't enough, then what is the solution?
The only goal that makes sense for humanity is drawdown, a year-to-year reduction in carbon in the upper atmosphere. Anything else is climate chaos. If we want to achieve drawdown, we have to go thank the earth and start to farm and grow our plants and trees in an entirely different way. Once you achieve drawdown, within 20 years, you have cooling. You have the beginning of cooling. So now we have a horizon that if you're 20, 30 years old, you can say, in my lifetime, we can achieve this.
In other words, the very practices that heal our soils will also heal our climate. To stabilize the Earth's climate, we can use the most powerful carbon capture technologies: the photosynthesis of plants and the microorganisms in the soil. And the one type of farming that does this the best and draws down the most carbon is based on the concept of regeneration, which simply means to repair the damage we've done and make things better.
So we are sitting in a food forest. This is agroforestry. It's agriculture through trees, tree diversification. I've got an avocado tree, banana tree, fig tree, coffee trees. We went from a monocrop of single Hass avocado to now having about 40 different fruit varieties on site.
'Cause my home is where my food is grown. I'm going back to the earth.
By diversifying, we can now have harvests every month. If you're looking to do something that would greatly impact Mother Earth, plant a tree. You don't need acres and acres and acres to build a food forest. You really just need a few hundred square feet. You're gonna look outside one day and go, what is something we buy every day at the grocery store that instead of waiting for it to be shipped around the world to me, what can I put in my own backyard that I can do myself?
And to truly be forgiven, we must all get back to living with the land in harmony. I'm going back to the earth. I'm going back.
Regenerative agriculture grows more food per acre. It's scalable to our entire agricultural system, and what's more, it's already being done right now, today.
So I'm taking it to a field here that is a multi-species cover crop. The purpose of a cover crop is to enhance the life and the function of the soil. Think of it this way, if I'd grow a monoculture on this field, would only be feeding the soil biology one type of root exudate. I'm growing 19 species here. We're accelerating biological time. We're feeding the soil biology what it would take a conventional farmer 19 years to do. I'm doing it in 1 year. So people might ask, how do you get any money from this thing? Our livestock will graze this during the winter, speeding up the process of regenerating those soils. Animals grazing living plants are a part of the carbon cycle. Here in the northern plains, our soils were formed by large herds of bison and elk being moved by predators, grazing a landscape, trampling that carbon, the plants onto the soil surface, not coming back for maybe a year, allowing full recovery.
It wasn't that long ago that over 60 million buffalo roamed the continent, and the people who lived here for millennia knew exactly how to coexist with those animals.
My name is Charging Eagle of the Oglala Lakota of the Seven Council Fires. There was this story of Creator Tukashila telling our people to follow the buffalo, and the buffalo will show you where your lands are. This whole area, this whole region belonged to our people, the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota Nation. My ancestors, they lived in a period of time when everything came from nature. You can actually drink from the rivers, eat what was caught in the rivers, gather berries. Everything was a part of this bigger circle. And the buffalo meant the world. The buffalo meant everything to us. We became the buffalo. We were known as the Buffalo Nation. We didn't see ourselves as above animals or below animals. We were just right there with them. And they took care of us. We became a part of that bigger system.
In an attempt to starve the Native Americans, the U.S. military and the railroads killed most of the buffalo. By the time the culling ended, only a few thousand of the majestic animals remained.
When you become a part of what I call the accumulation culture, when you live in that culture, you're going to lose track of what it means to be a part of something else. Because when you start to accumulate, you tend to forget what is important and you become separate. The more you become separate, the unhappier you're going to become because you're going to want more and more and more. Accumulation is like an addiction. It's part of this illness, this addiction that prevents us from being sustainable with nature. I mean, being thankful for this earth, for this piece of ground that we have. We have to look at all of these things, the global warming, the loss of drinking water, all of these negative things happening, the violence, the war. All of that is all rooted in that accumulation cultural mindset. We have to be able to let some of that go now. We have to say, okay, we've done enough. Enough's enough. That's where we're at right now, and it can be done.
Recent studies show that when cows are kept on pasture and constantly moved, like the buffalo, They not only help sequester carbon, they help rebuild entire ecosystems. That's regeneration. A new breed of farmers and ranchers are using hooved animals to restore damaged land.
I was raised in a rural area in Washington, adopted by a Lakota elder. We were out in nature every day. I found permaculture, and that was very influential in my life, where I could see that there could be a permanent agriculture, an agriculture that not only fed the planet, but also fed the people in a way that regenerated and didn't deplete resources.
Holistic ranchers like the market guards use careful planning so their cows sequester carbon and actually regenerate the land.
Cows can be good. That is one of the most controversial statements of mankind at this point. Using cattle, allowing them to roam and graze and planned grazing can literally revive enough space to create a tremendous amount of drawdown. I'm from Southeast Louisiana. I grew up in an incredibly delicate ecosystem. Conservation was always a very serious part of my life. I had no idea that the earth was desertified. I got on a plane from New York City to fly to Zimbabwe to meet Alan Savory, so he could show us the difference between desertification and regeneration. Land that has been holistically managed through planned grazing using cattle, the most vilified animal in the world.
We are in Africa right now, driving through a field that has been under Alan Savory's holistic management for 9 years, and it is in Eden. This is what you call high grass.
Using livestock to reverse desertification is totally scalable to about 2/3 of the world's land, and nothing else is. And frankly, that can be done at extremely low cost.
Here we are. This is what it should be like. You've been working on this land for 8 or 9 years. It went from a place of turning into a total desert and using hooved herding herbivores. You have literally transformed that, what we've been seeing, into this. How in the hell do you make this happen?
So the dung, the urine, and the hooves of the animals are what cause this grass to grow. That livestock is never on more than a hectare of this land, about 2.5 acres, never more than 3 days.
Right.
And they're never back on that piece of land under about 6 to 9 months.
Wow.
So no plant can get overgrazed. You can come any day of the year, anywhere on this land, and you will see no livestock, because they will be on less than 1 hectare of land. Unless we take you there, you won't even know it.
Dealing with this beast of climate change, a lot of people don't understand that this helps climate change. This sequesters carbon. This takes the one thing that we so desperately need out of the air, and it holds it, and it makes oxygen.
Yeah, if we can produce solid grassland, you can pull down enormous amounts of carbon back into the soil. 2/3 of the world, roughly, is grasslands and savannas where the rainfall is too low to support a solid canopy of trees giving you soil cover. So grass is essentially what has to stabilize that soil.
You look at this and you realize this is what the world should look like. This is what Africa should look like. This is what South and Central America should look like. This is what Texas should look like. This is how we win.
we can get the earth back to the Garden of Eden that it once was by regeneration.
When used smartly, herbivores can pull down carbon and reverse desertification. But it doesn't just work for Africa. It works everywhere in the world.
The form of agriculture that we use creates billions of lives in the form of soil microbes, in nematodes, in grassland birds. All of that wildlife is flourishing under an agriculture system versus a tilled crop field, which is denuded of life.
The odds are there are some things that you can do to save our soils today.
Compost is the natural decomposition of organic matter in nature. In a forest floor, it's when the leaves drop, the fungi and bacteria take it over and literally build the soil at the root zone. Compost is all about community. From the community of microbes that are breaking down the pile to the community of individuals in Los Angeles that are physically turning and sifting and contributing to that pile.
Everyone is connected to the soil. Everybody is connected to the soil, no matter who you are, what color, male, female, it doesn't matter where you come from. We're all connected to the soil. And for me, I'm concerned about that 1 inch, right? That takes years to develop 1 inch of soil. I collect food scraps from restaurants, manure from zoos, manure. Do you know why? To keep this stuff out of landfills and use it to make good, rich dirt. That's why. How do we take waste and repurpose and reuse it, because it's really not waste?
There are continents and other really large regions that are getting hit with a double whammy of higher temperatures and drought. This kills soil. It kills life. One of the solutions to that challenge is to collect the food scraps from cities like San Francisco, turn them into compost, and get it onto local farms, and that helps them retain water because compost is a natural sponge. The unfortunate reality is most trash or garbage gets incinerated or sent to a landfill. We collect our food scraps, we put them in the green bin, it goes off to Recology's compost facility, we turn it into compost and it gets on a farm. That's a simple solution.
Compost is just one of a suite of soil-based carbon capture solutions. The more we choose regenerative foods, the more the farmers will grow them.
We're at a critical moment in human history. There could be a way to eat food that heals the planet. The way we're articulating it is the regenerative diet. If we do eat meat, we need to eat meat that comes from pasture-raised, grass-fed, humanely killed animals.
This is the most crucial choice all of us can make for the future of the planet. What are we eating? What kind of farming systems are we supporting? Are we regenerating the earth or are we degenerating?
If you look over here, we have my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallowed. It has had nothing growing on it for over a year, except for the few Roundup-resistant weeds that are on here. It's an ecological desert. Then you look over at our paddocks. You have a diversity of different plant species. You have insects, you have wildlife, plus the livestock grazing on it. We're capturing sunlight from early in the spring till late in the fall, converting that sunlight into liquid carbon to drive and fuel the system. There you have soil. Over on this side, you have dirt. Where do you want your food to come from? Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
All over our planet, people are using the practices of regeneration to heal the land and balance the climate. Some of these projects are big.
We know that about 25% of the world's land mass has been degraded by human beings over historical time. When we look at the cradles of civilization, Greece and Rome, we find that many of these places have turned into deserts. The sand is blowing across the ruins of once great civilizations. The Loess Plateau, the cradle of Chinese civilization, was the place where settled agriculture first began. When I was asked to film the baseline study in the Loess Plateau, I found myself alone, standing on a mountaintop, and I could look in 360 degrees and there was no vegetation. This was fundamentally ecologically destroyed. It was called the most eroded place on Earth, filled with miserably poor people. So I felt that I had to spend the rest of my life dealing with this. It was hard to imagine at that time that you could restore that. So from about 1994 till 2009, 14 years, an area of 35,000 square kilometers, approximately the size of Belgium. They had the top Chinese scientists, they had international scientists from the World Bank supporting them. They created mapping systems with satellites so that every watershed had a unique address. The results were stunning. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. We met people who were illiterate, and their children now go to the top universities in the country. Human beings emerged in paradise. If we restore all the degraded land on the earth, we can return to paradise. If we start now to build a restoration economy, a regeneration economy, this is the way forward to see a stream return and flow, to bring back fertile soils, to see biodiversity return to a place that was completely devastated. This is where everyone can find tremendous satisfaction.
When I look into your eyes, it's like watching the night sky or a beautiful sunrise. Well, there's so much they hold.
So let's restore a little bit of paradise every day. It's not that difficult. If we stop distracting ourselves with shiny objects and we start to think about what's really important to us, to see biodiversity return to a place that was completely devastated. This is where everyone can find tremendous satisfaction and the meaning of our lives.
We're all in this together. Every action that we take affects every other action, like a ripple in the pond. So what decision are you going to make that will make a positive impact on this beautiful planet so that our great-grandchildren, 7 generations in the future, can actually go up and hug an old-growth redwood tree and swim in clean waters and be able to open their mouths and drink while they're swimming. And what is it that we can do today so that our children can flourish in the abundance that we've created by our decisions?
When you are at your best in the world, a lot of the times you're feeling your best in nature. You're at your best in nature, and there's something there. There's something ancient there. The wisdom of that, it's sacred. It's one path to being happy in the world.
It's not about religion. It's not about politics. It's about love. And if you love something or you love somebody, you want to understand them and you want to take care of them and protect them and keep them safe. And that's what we're all here to do. Even the little mycorrhizal fungi and the worms and the bacteria. And if we take care of them, they'll take care of us.
From the smallest microbes to the largest creatures, our blue planet pulses with life. For millions of years, it has self-healed and self-balanced. But today, our species faces its biggest test. Our mission is simple. We must harness the regenerative power of Earth itself. I'll make you a deal. I won't give up, and neither should you.
Even the stars, they burn. Some even fall to the earth. We got a lot to learn. God knows we're worth it. No, I won't give up. I don't want to be someone who walks away so easily. I'm here to stay and make the difference that I can make. I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're incredibly honored that you took the time to watch Kiss the Ground, the film, and are taking the time today to join us on this panel. I'm incredibly honored to be moderating today with some of my favorite people who work in the field of regenerative ag and soil health and are just inspirational leaders across the board. Our intention today is to awaken people to the possibilities of regeneration and connect you, all of you who are watching, to this movement. The soil health and regenerative agriculture space is expanding, and we want to have you participate in it. So many of the folks you're going to be hearing from today are on the front lines, moving this conversation forward and really seeing that we can shift the trajectory and the perspective of humanity toward one of regeneration and restoration. I'm going to start with our short bios. Today, we are waiting on currently Dr. Vandana Shiva, and her bio will start with that. Besides being a physicist, ecologist, activist, editor, and author of numerous books, Vandana Shiva is a tireless defender of the environment. She is the founder of Navdanya, a movement for biodiversity conservation and farmer rights. She's also the founder and director of the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Natural Resource Policy. Shiva fights for changes in the practice and paradigms of agriculture and food. Quote, "I don't want to live in a world where 5 giant companies control health and our food." Gabe Brown is joining us today. He is one of the pioneers of the current soil health movement, which focuses on regeneration of our resources. Gabe, along with his wife Shelley and son Paul, own and operate Brown's Ranch, a diversified 5,000-acre farm and ranch near Bismarck, North Dakota. Gabe and Brown's Ranch have received countless awards in many forms and recognition for their work. Gabe recently authored the book Dirt to Soil, One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture. Gabe is a partner at Understanding Agriculture, LLC, and a regenerative consulting company, which is currently consulting over 25 million acres. He's also an instructor for the Soil Health Academy, which focuses on teaching others and empowering them on the importance of healthy, functioning ecosystems. We have Gisele Bündchen joining us today. She's a global environmentalist, best-selling author, philanthropist, and supermodel. She's known for her long-standing and passionate commitment to sustainability and environmental conservation. With a uniquely global reach, Bündchen uses her influence to bring attention to our planet and how society can collectively work to protect it. She is often noted among the world's most generous celebrities. Bündchen's professionalism, contagious energy, and radiant spirit allows her to remain a consistent and unstoppable force in the ever-changing industry. We have Precious Piri, is a member of Regeneration International. She's on their steering committee and also serves as their Africa coordinator. She's a training and development specialist in regenerative environmental issues and community organizing. After 9 years career with the Savory Hub in Zimbabwe, she founded an organization called Earth Wisdom. Her work focuses on training rural communities and using restorative farming programs like holistic land and livestock management, and collaborating with networks in Africa to reduce poverty, rebuild soils, and restore food and water security for people, livestock, and wildlife. We have John D. Liu, who you just saw at the end of the film here. He's an American ecologist and filmmaker. John has worked with Common Land Foundation on catalyzing privately invested large-scale restoration worldwide since 2009 and is currently its ecosystem ambassador. John also founded the Ecosystem Restoration Camps movement in 2016, which has grown to 50 camps, I believe, in 6 continents by year's end. That's this year. And John has written, directed, produced, filmed, and presented numerous films on environment, ecology for the BBC, National Geographic, Discovery, PBS, and other networks. And finally, we have Days, is a 21-year-old climate justice activist who centers regenerative cultures, intersectionality, radical social justice, and youth political engagement in her work. In 2019, she was the youngest candidate to stand in the European parliamentary election. Days' advocacy for racial systemic change has led her to work with many leading charities, NGOs, and grassroots changemakers globally, like Extinction Rebellion. She is currently the creative director for Earthrise Studios, an environmentally focused media company, as well as a consultant for a variety of NGOs and a monthly contributor to Sky TV's Climate Show. Her and her team, I think, did an amazing job covering what was happening at COP this year. Thank you all so much for joining us. We just rocked through those bios. We are going to start with Gabe Brown. I think we're still waiting on Dr. Shiva. She's going to be joining us. I believe she's at an event at COP at the moment. So we're going to jump to the question for Gabe Brown. Gabe, I love your part of Kiss the Ground in the movie, and you've been such a huge part of so many advocates like myself, really being able to stand behind this movement and show where it's working. With Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy, you train thousands of farmers and ranchers around North America. What are some of the main reasons farmers and ranchers are turning to regenerative management, and what does it give them that conventional has not?
Sure. Thank you, Finian. Pleasure to be with you today. So realize that all of us involved in production agriculture, we do that to not only feed ourselves and our families, but to feed many others. And we need to make a profit. It's a business to us. So why they're turning to regenerative ag is for that increased profit. Work by Dr. Jonathan Lundgren at the Ecdysis Foundation has shown that those who use these regenerative practices increase their net profitability by 78%. That's a real reason for a lot of farmers and ranchers to move down this path.
And one more thing on that, Gabe, in terms of what they're seeing for legacy, for family tradition, being able to stay in farming and or biodiversity decreases. I heard from one of your colleagues, Dr. Alan Williams, that bird species is one of the big reasons that a lot of ranchers are asking for consultation from you all to help bring back their bird populations that have been decreased significantly.
That's right, Finian. The second most prominent reason farmers and ranchers are moving down this path is they realize that the conventional production model is all about killing things. It's no fun to work with death. It's very enjoyable to work with life. And what we're seeing is an amazing explosion of biodiversity, of water holding capacity in our soil, improved nutrient cycling, clean water, clean air. The list goes on and on. Who wouldn't want to work with that rather than death?
Beautiful. The next question is for Giselle. Giselle, you were such a big part of Kiss the Ground, the movie. It was in production for 7 years, and you were the critical part in pushing it to Netflix to actually have them pick it up. It now has over 5 million views, 1 billion impressions, 60 awards, and has helped shape the global conversation on agriculture and regeneration in general. Can you tell us why you stepped in to help put your weight behind this film, and why do you feel that now is such an important time for all of us to step up and use our connections and resources to move this conversation forward? Oh, you're on mute still, Giselle.
Sorry. I believe the stories about our relationship with the earth are powerful and important. And I'm also a mother, and the future of our children relies on the preservation of our ecosystem. So when I saw the film first, and I just love, I got so inspired by it because he explored the problem but offers solutions and practical answers that we can implement in our daily lives. I mean, he really showed like what Gabe was, it was amazing to see what happens with a farm that is doing monoculture versus a regenerative farm. It was amazing, the life, the biodiversity. It was just it created so much hope in me. I felt like everyone needs to know about this, right? Because in the end of the day, right, food is medicine. Our health is directly connected to what we eat, and everything starts in the soil. If the soil isn't healthy and depleted of nutrients, so is our food. So I was like, everyone needs to know about this, and we need to, so that's why. I'm just very inspired by the film.
And what would you say to folks who are just learning about this, but also have the ability to push this out to audiences or folks? What is your words to them of get in, help out? Do you have any words of encouragement for folks to step into this?
Well, I think it just becoming more aware. We are the drivers of our ship, right? So take our health into our own hands. And I think making more informed decisions, I think it's a very different, I think we choose with our dollars, right? So how do we shop, right? So what are you buying from regenerative agriculture? Get more informed and see how you can help your local farmers, or see how you can, really eat foods that are coming from those kind of practices, and also talk to your politicians in your state and kind of, inform them about regenerative agriculture, because it depends on it's connected to all our health and the health of, like Gabe said, is the water quality, is the biodiversity, is all of that. So I think people just need to become more informed and take their health into their own hands and buy with their, put their dollars on people who are doing regenerative agriculture. That's what I think.
Thank you. And I just want to remind folks that there's so much knowledge and experience behind you. When you step in to activate others, we're all here with hundreds and thousands of others to support you. You don't have to be the expert necessarily. Pardon me. Precious, while folks like Bill Gates are pushing to get chemical fertilizers to farmers across the world, we know well that this approach won't solve the crises long term. How does investing in regenerative agriculture practices specifically improve water security, food security for impoverished communities, and transform the lives of farmers and ranchers? You and I have discussed a lot about what the future means for food and water sovereignty.
Thank you. Thank you, Finian. And so interesting that you actually start the question by talking about folks like Bill Gates, who are really sort of pushing the agenda of green revolution across the African landscape. And thankfully, in the African landscape itself, there is a lot of growth in the on-the-ground movements that are pushing regeneration and agroecology. And I think farmers are also embracing the fact that the landscape that we are working with is very tricky and difficult, and policies are not necessarily supporting these sort of practices to thrive. But at the same time, the results of the efforts that farmers have been pushing and showing of regeneration and regenerative agriculture are literally speaking louder than the opposing voices. So I think it's important for farmers and everyone who's working with farmers like myself to embrace the fact that it's a long journey. That's one thing for sure. It is not easy. It has to be transformative, and we have to stick with the language because we've seen the hope, the potential, and what is truly possible behind all the struggles that farmers are going through. And I think this movement will come from the citizens that arise, as well as also showing results. So to a certain extent, the research must also come from the farmers, that these are the results of what I've seen is possible. I know big corporations, they keep trying and keep pushing, and it's a huge temptation for communities that are going through a lot of struggles. But then at the same time, I think the movement is as strong, because I think regeneration in the end, it's not necessarily about agriculture only, but it should improve lives socially and culturally, so people embracing their way of life, and then improving the economic drivers of these communities. So having actual economic stability through your lands, and obviously ecological well-being, which we have lots of different ecosystems, both above ground and below ground, that we've seen can improve, including watersheds.
Thank you, Precious. And
yeah,
I remember getting a message from you a while back of a spring that had reemerged on a property that had been in, 15, 20 years of no springs coming out of the ground. But because of management change and helping the soil function, you're seeing springs come back to places that didn't have water access in many ways. When we talk about the chemical version, it's basically a fix or a Band-Aid on something that's broken versus rebuilding the broken thing. And I think that's the promise of any communities that are in agriculture around the world. We're rebuilding the function of the land. And I think that that's something that goes throughout. And that leads to our next question to John. When it comes to regeneration, why do you think governments are so unwilling to make significant investments and dedicate time as they did in the Laos Plateau example we just watched? Ecological function, as you always are saying, is arguably the most important thing for all of humanity in the world. And we know that when we regenerate lands, we also have local economic prosperity, water security, food security, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, etc. Why do you think it's still getting a back seat in government-led investments, and how do we change this aside from just more tree planting campaigns?
Yeah, I would say that we have, thank you so much for having me, by the way, and for doing this. I would say that we have a fundamental problem. We've made a mistake in valuing what is truly valuable. So we're saying that things are the basis, material things are the basis of wealth. But this is just simply untrue. So we have this kind of fundamental mistake, which is left over from long historical time. And it's been the justification for some pretty egregious, violent episodes in human history. And we need to put this behind us. We need to say, well, those things were wrong. You can't go and kill people and commit genocide and have slavery and order everybody to, change their lives because you came in with a big gun. And the situation now is that the materialism is what's measured. And so we have this metric which is just false. Like we have more and more plastic junk going all over the place. And that's supposed to create money. That's supposed to create wealth. While at the same time, we're facing an existential threat from climate changes. And we're not recognizing that the value of functional ecosystems is vastly higher than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make throughout all time. And so when we understand this, we realize that there's this fundamental mistake. And in order to not only deal with hydrology, soil fertility, biodiversity, and climate regulation, we need to deal with social justice. We need to deal with all of the terrible things which have happened historically and not pass the mistakes to the next generation, but to say, it ends here, it stops here, that's done. We're not going to do that anymore in the future because we understand that life is more valuable than things. And so that's where I think we are at this point. And, I think we've seen that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So it's just a question of valuing the work that people do to restore these things. And if the work of people to restore Earth systems is valued, then we have full employment. We've addressed a number of the mistakes that have happened in the past, and that's what we need to do. So everybody should join ecosystem restoration camps or check out Common Land Foundation and how the 4 returns will bring you ecosystem restoration as well as financial gain.
Thank you, John. And I just want to reiterate for folks watching, as we look across the world, if anyone goes on Google Earth and sees how much land is currently degraded and has been degraded because of humans, it's scary, and it's showing you how close to the brink we really, really are. And the idea that we can somehow say, oh, we're just going to keep giving food aid or water aid to this country and refugees, we'll take them here. Like, that's at the breaking point. And regeneration is not only solving that, but it's giving sovereignty and this ability for any community to have prosperity because they have the foundations that John just laid out. So thank you, John, for that. And Days, over to you. You and I agreed on a call earlier that without being connected to the possibilities of regeneration, one can't emerge as an advocate for it. So why is the focus on regeneration versus sustainability or conservation so critical for your generation? And how important is it that the global community get these concepts of regeneration to your generation? And specifically, are there any roles that you see your generation and folks jumping into to affect change on this?
Yeah, I feel that when we think about sustainability, that's something that could have happened maybe 50 years ago. We are far past the point of having to sustain the system because we recognize, as John has said, the system is corrupt. It's so flawed, whether that's social justice, which actually connects back to the land. A lot of the time when people think about regenerative agriculture or soil degradation, they think of something that's just happening to the ecosystem, but they fail to recognize it's the way that we've treated one another, which has affected the way we treat the earth. We haven't valued the earth. We haven't valued each other. And how do we change this? This is where it comes to, my work is more broadly around regenerative cultures, which is learning about what parts do we play within society. how do we move to be better? And then how do we take that same level of love, duty, and care back to the earth? And when we do that, we all change. It's the recognition that all of these issues are very linked together. They're holistic in nature, and we cannot solve our society without thinking about how we feed ourselves, how we nourish ourselves, and the earth that provides for us in so many different ways. And I think for young people, our place within this is visionary. I think especially as everyone goes about the pandemic babies, I'm like, I've lived through a recession, I've lived through a pandemic, and I've lived through all sorts. And I'm only 21. We are resilient, but we also have the hearts to dream big and vision big and know what our world should look like and demand for more. And I think that's where young people come in. I'm quite lucky to work in a local nature reserve and to see young people interact with the soil, with the land through forest schools. And there is something so powerful in young people being able to hold the soil and know what they're fighting for. And that makes their desire to change things so much stronger.
Thank you for that. And I don't know, we don't have enough time today to get so into it, but I just think it's so crucial where people can set up and become a source for folks to get it. I always remind people, like, look, Al Gore was on the front of the climate change movement. He didn't know about soil 10 years ago. Like, reminding people, if you look up the most famous environmentalists, the top first 12 that appear, the only one who knew about soil as a solution to all this stuff was 15 years ago was Dr. Vandana Shiva, who is supposed to be here today right now. But, thinking about that, this is an emerging idea. And if we're just counting on the folks who are in the know, who we see out there as the ones who are leading this, that's not enough. We need to start bringing in the leaders of this movement, connecting them to the young people who are emerging as these leaders. And so this conversation gains more strength. And I think that now is that critical time that we see this, because still regeneration, soil health, as much as we know about it, most of the world is just catching on. So many indigenous cultures have lived this for so long, but generally our societies at large are missing this amazing opportunity. So thank you for being that source, Days. Next question for Gabe. There's a misconception of how regenerative agriculture works. You and I were participating in the hearing for the House Agriculture Committee this past February. We could clearly see the people making decisions in the U.S. knew very little about how this works, many saying, for example, 6 years to get profit in the transition to regenerative. What is the state of our soils right now in the U.S. and potentially the world? How bad is it? And how quickly can farmers and ranchers experience a turnaround? And what does that look like for flooding, drought, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, profits, et cetera? And at the end of the day, how is this a win, Gabe, beyond just farmers? How is this a win for others?
Yes. So first of all, I've had the good fortune of traveling extensively all over the world. I've been on hundreds of farms and ranches, and I can honestly say I've never been on a single one, including my own, that's not degraded. They're all degraded to some point. Days was exactly right. The thought of sustainability is long gone. We need regeneration, and we need it now. One of the things that frustrated me the most about testifying in front of Congress is their lack of coming together. One of the things my team likes to say is common ground for common good. As people on this planet, we can all agree on 80+% of the things. We all want clean air. We want clean water. We want to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil where it belongs. Nothing can do that like regenerative agriculture can. And as Giselle said, we all want nutrient-dense food for ourselves and our children. Regenerative agriculture is a win-win situation for all society. We're going to increase biodiversity. We're going to do all these other things. Why can't we come together as a society for the good of all?
Thank you, Gabe. And another question on top of that. So talking about, the quote I always go to is Dr. Alan Williams, who works with you at Understanding Ag, is what used to take us 15 to 20 years, we're now doing in 3 to 4. Can you talk about that in terms of like flood mitigation, drought, what are farmers seeing when they really dive into this with your assistance and others who are experts in this, how fast it can happen now compared to when you guys, a lot of you were still just finding out these amazing methodologies?
That's right. What we're seeing is what took Alan and myself 20 plus years. We're seeing Farmers and ranchers who adopt the soil health principles to drive the processes do in as little as 3 to 5 years. You know, for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, we can hold at least 20,000 more gallons of water per acre. Think of what that would mean for flood control. Think of what it would mean to mitigate droughts. You know, I'm in the northern Great Plains in North America, severe drought for the past 5 years now. What would that mean if we could make our farms, our ranches, our ecosystems, bring them back to the resiliency that they once were? It can happen very quickly. We're seeing young farmers now do it in just a matter of years, significantly advance their ecosystems.
Yeah, and just to put it in people's minds, a half an inch rainfall in most places in the US in broken soils is infiltrating a half an inch in almost an hour sometimes. On a ranch like Gabe's or the one that I'm visiting in California later this month, 4 seconds. So their neighbors are infiltrating in an hour a half an inch rainfall. They infiltrate it in 4 seconds. Imagine if we expanded the 4-second infiltration to the entire region of that area of California. We've mitigated floods. We've made droughts a thing of the past because floods and droughts follow each other when our soil is broken. Thank you for that, Gabe. Next question over to Giselle again. Tell us more a little bit about, like, for you, you know, you're a passionate person who's been in so many environmental things. What really drew you into regenerative ag and soil health? I know you touched on some of the human health things, but can you expand on that for us? Oh, you're muted again, Giselle. Sorry, I'll notify you next time.
Regenerating our soil means regenerating our health and the health of all living beings. Like Gabe was saying, it's like biodiversity comes back, everything comes back, right? Soil is the foundation of life. It supports the cycle of life. If we nourish the soil, it can nourish us. So healing the soil is the path to healing ourselves and the planet, all living beings. You know, I did this project in Brazil, Água Limpa, which was to bring water back to the city where I grew up. And it was incredible how the springs, you know, were becoming, they were droughts because they didn't have any more, you know, plants basically. And it became like just this sandy soil. So it wasn't able to absorb the rain, and all of that mud was kind of going into the springs and basically polluting the water, because everything that was coming from the runoffs of agriculture was just going into the rivers. And it was incredible with, like what Gabe says, 3 to 5 years. We saw a huge change within 3 years as the plants start, you know, becoming more just stronger. Like not only the soil was able to absorb the water, but the incredible amount of biodiversity that came back was incredible. Like birds, animals, like insects. Like you would grab the soil and it was like moist and like all these different worms. You were like, wow. I mean, nature is amazing. It's like, it literally, it's like all we need to do is like nourish it, you know, take care of it so it can take care of us. How are we going to be taken care of if we don't take care of it, right? And by us just being more mindful, like all life can thrive, right? In this case, our life, you know, like we can grow without water. And whenever we deplete the soil to that state where it becomes like sand, becomes like dead soil, you no longer can grow our food or, you know, support the rainfall. I mean, nothing can live on that. So I feel like it's, you know.
No, I think it's such a wonderful account of like I encourage everyone out there, go and visit farms that have done this, see what their neighbors across the street looks like. Do it. Go to the things that have happened where they've done ecosystem restoration. When you see it with your own eyes and you see the biodiversity, you see the functionality, it is so magical. You get the realization that this isn't just some pie in the sky weird idea. This works and can work for everyone everywhere. Thank you for that, Giselle. Next question for Precious. In regenerative agriculture, there's the mantra context, context, context. When it comes to training and disseminating the ideas of regenerative agriculture to different communities, what are some of the most crucial things to make the ideas stick and the impact remain in that community to remain empowered? You're muted there, Precious.
Thank you. Thanks, Finian. So I think the word context is becoming one of the most important concepts in the regeneration movement, because I don't think that regenerative practices are copy and paste exactly the same way in every place, but we are understanding regeneration and regenerative agriculture as a framework of making those decisions that will enable each place in its uniqueness to thrive. So I have a few questions that I always work with communities around to answer. So it will be just brief. For example, each community, before they take on tools of regeneration, you ask yourselves, how can I contribute to make my place thrive? Not necessarily the same way the neighbor's place does. So we're applying principles, but in a way that makes sense to us. And how can I better understand the ecological context of my place and apply the relevant tools? Another one is, what are those conducive conditions that can cause our ecosystem thrive, as well as our culture and our economy? And what is that? How does that look like? How does abundance look like for us? One of the communities that I've worked with, we say abundance goes beyond plentifulness, but it's also abundance in generosity. That means when I'm dealing with the earth or with my neighbor, I'm not only extracting, but I have a nature of also giving back. And then you keep a cycle of giving back. And then another one, how do I recognize and what are those relationships and connections that exist in the space that I'm managing? So that can only be unpacked when you understand your context and your area that you're managing fully. So I hope that's helpful, but it was just in brief.
Yeah, and that's the holistic framework. Context is such a big component of the holistic framework. And I think one of the conversations we had a while back of just sometimes the flawed sense of the copy and paste and or outsider voice being like, I have the solution for you, versus working with the context of the community and working to empower the folks who are going to be leading on the ground. We've seen that just tried like, oh, here, pop in some NGO folks who train and then they leave. And it just, that model is stuck and not working. So I really appreciate the work you're doing to remedy that and have a new approach. John DeLu, one of the reasons I pushed so hard to have your part in the Kiss the Ground, the movie, is because I wanted people to understand that while this can happen farm by farm, it can also be tackled at scale. Watershed, biodiversity, the entire ecosystem can be restored. Can you share some more examples from around the world where you've seen this happen and why it's so crucial right now for the identity of humanity to move toward that of the steward who's helping this emerge and ways that governments can support that?
Yeah, well, I think really governments generally follow public opinion. So it's really a good idea if the people understand and decide we want to have functional ecosystems. We want the best for our children and future generations. And we want to tell the truth about what is valuable rather than pretend that material things are the basis of wealth. And I think that we also see that while we can do this at every scale, we can do this in microcosms, and we can link microcosms up together. They are microclimates, and when we link up the microclimates, they become the macroclimate. So we have to realize that surface temperatures and vegetation and organic material on the earth, near the earth, is holding and trapping moisture near the surface of the earth. That changes surface temperatures, which reduces thermic drafts, which lowers the ability to drive moisture into the upper atmosphere. That's exactly what we need to do. And we need to do this everywhere. We don't need to only do this in some places. We need to do this everywhere, because that was the method that evolution took to hold moisture near the earth. And so understanding that and realizing how to do that, and like if we don't know how to do that, let's all work together to learn how to do that. So we can do that at ecosystem restoration camps. They're not permanent. They're places where we can go and study and work and and live together for a short while to learn how to do this. And then we have to go take this knowledge everywhere. But the faster we do this, we need the lowest cost and the highest efficiency, the highest impact. So if we look at the constant discussions in marble halls with people with cufflinks and Italian suits, and we imagine like, well, how often do you think they're going to go out and do some soil amendment, or how much are they going to do? It's not them. It's the millions and billions of people around the world who live very close to the land. They're the ones who have the opportunity to do this. And so we need to ensure that their contribution to saving human civilization is valued and that they're paid for their work. So instead of having the money swirling around in high cost, consultants, let's go and work directly with these people in communities and value their contribution, because they're the ones who do it.
Yes, John. Yes. And I just wanted the context-wise of so many of the projects that you've seen. People, please go watch Hope in a Changing Climate, that John Duluth, one of his feature films. Countless examples of where this happens. You remind yourself of like, it's going to be 7 years from now and 7 years from now. If we start on these projects with communities working on it, they're going to have, like Ethiopia, that one project, there's rivers and streams running where it was total desert. Where they didn't do the projects, it's still total desert 7 years later. Like, we got to start now because we can make the change. If we don't now, it's just going to get harder. Thank you so much for that, John. Last question, Days, over to you. You've been in Glasgow with the organization Earthrise during the whole COP. Can you tell us what you're doing with Choose Earth and why the message is so crucial? Why is supporting Indigenous leaders so crucial right now as we're looking to build this momentum of regenerative ag and soil health around the world?
Yeah, so Choose Earth is a campaign that Earthrise runs with Choose Love, and it's meant to focus on how do we resource the true guardians of this land, which is Indigenous people, with 80% of biodiversity living in Indigenous territories when they only are 6% of the global population. It's crazy. The fact that they're not given a seat at the table, and we have people like Boris Johnson and the others in suits making decisions about soil health, when the true protectors of the land aren't represented, and don't have a seat at the table. So our campaign has one side, which is meant to fundraise. It's meant to support 64 Indigenous communities in Brazil in order for them to basically be able to do what they need to do. It's unrestricted funds, and we don't take anything, and everything directly goes to the Indigenous groups. But then the other side is to make sure we continue to campaign that Indigenous people, not just from Brazil, but all across the world, need to have a seat at the table, especially when we're talking about how we need to change our food system, how we need to encourage biodiversity, and how we need to stop this crazy attack on our earth. I think there's no other way to say it. And that's kind of the Choose Earth campaign. And I encourage everyone to donate or even support in any way you can, because supporting the people who are doing the work on the land is the most important thing we can do.
Thank you so much. And just on that, we only have a couple more minutes, but the way that so many of us are looking at regenerative agriculture, if you do it with just the holistic management and science, that is a significant part that's getting most of the clout right now. Without place-based Indigenous knowledge, we're still going to fail at scale. So when we look at this, those three pillars, we need to make sure Indigenous place-based knowledge is right up there with the holistic management frameworks, as well as the science that we have at our fingertips. These three things, from Kiss the Ground's perspective, have to be married, have to be a part of it. Otherwise, it just won't work fundamentally. I've been so honored to be here with you all today. Thank you so much. I'm just going to rattle off how people can get involved. I see we're coming to the top of the hour right now. From Kiss the Ground's perspective, share Kiss the Ground, the movie. It works to get people on board with this. Become a soil advocate through our soil advocate training program. Become a member. Read Kiss the Ground, the book. Check out our resources page. We're doing a big campaign toward the next Farm Bill in the United States, so look out for news for Regenerate America coming soon. Dr. Shiva wasn't able to join us today, but we had amazing questions for her. Check out navdanya.org. Watch the film Seeds of Vandana Shiva and read her many, many books. Gabe Brown, read his book, Dirt to Soil. Help farmers get trained through donating to Soil Health Academy. Tell your North American farmers or others to get training through Understanding Ag. John, join ecosystem restoration camps, ecosystemrestorationcamps.org. Precious, Regeneration International, and I couldn't find the website for your other work, so I'll let you plug that in a second. And Days, you have Earthrise, and any other from Precious or Days, any websites you want to direct people to?
Well, I would actually like to direct people to my lawsuit. I'm currently suing the government over their dependence on negative emission technologies. I feel like the Earth has protected us from carbon and sequestered carbon forever. So why are we doing so much dependence on technologies that we don't know will work at mass scale? So in order to support, have a look at our website, have a look at our crowdfundraiser, and talk about how we need to start restoring basically working within the Earth systems rather than trying to use head-heavy solutions that won't get us what we need.
Exactly. And Precious, Igugu, can you say that for us?
IguguTrust.com. It's all
Great.
the community work and community stories that we work with.
Brilliant. It's been such a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you all for joining us online. We appreciate you so much for popping in to hear from us. Please stay in touch. Please join this movement. This is an amazingly expanding and generous and just extraordinary people fill this movement around the world. And these are just a few of my favorite heroes in this. So thank you so much for being with us. And we hope to see you soon. Any last words from the panel?
I just want to, it was a pleasure being here with all of you guys, but, it's just so much, right? And I just wanted to, mention something about John, because we think about consumism and greed, and really what's driving all these problems, if we really want to talk about it, is greed, right? Because we have the solutions, but, a lot of the people just don't want to do that because it kind of impacts the way they've been doing things for a long time that obviously haven't really been working, right? But I want to share this quote for us to just kind of leave with something to think about. And it's a Dalai Lama quote. And when he asked about humanity, he said something like, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he's so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he's never going to die, and then he dies having never really lived. So just...
Great ending. I love it.
Just for us to keep,
Go to a regenerative farm, get to see soil health in real life. Thank you all so much for your time. And I want to give a big shout out to Global Landscape Forum and UN Environment for having us, for showing Kiss the Ground the film and creating this community. Thank you all. We hope to see you soon. And be well, and regeneration is the future. Thank you so much.
Yes, let's regenerate. Bye, guys. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, wherever you're joining us from, my name is Musonda Mumba, and I'll be your moderator for this amazing Generation Restoration Film Festival. I'm so delighted. I mean, the panel that we have today is just an A1 panel. We are in Glasgow. Others are joining in from different parts of the world. But what we're seeing are the realities and complexities of our planet. And the speakers today will be speaking with their different forms of artwork, be it film, documentary making, books, dance, movement, just amazing. And I'm so glad that actually the GLF have curated this space together with UNEP and FAO, who are leading the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And you'll be listening to these speakers who are going to tell you, how can you be a part of this movement and a part of this journey? So look out for the hashtag Generation Restoration. So to begin with us today, I'm going to now turn to Volker Schondorf, who is an amazing filmmaker, Oscar and Palme d'Or award-winning filmmaker who's done excellent and brilliant films for the longest. And then he decided to go a different path, a slightly different path, and start making documentaries, telling the story of some complex landscapes that we've heard about, read about, or even just seen pictures of, the Great Green Wall in the Sahel. Volker, welcome. I'm so glad that you've joined us, and you're joining us from Berlin. You have been in this field for a long time. What inspired you to just go for that amazing space called the Sahel?
Well, I've been a long time, more than 50 years in feature filmmaking, but it was really the encounter with Tony Rinaldo, the Australian agronomist, 3 years ago, just as he received in December 2018, the so-called Alternative Nobel Award, the Right Livelihood Award. And he had a short stopover in Berlin, and he held a casual conference in the back room of an Italian restaurant on invitation from World Vision, which I've been supporting for 12 years or more. And I was just so impressed by the short expose he made of his method how to grow forests without planting a single tree, that I went to see him afterwards, and we met next morning in his hotel room, made a one-page deal, and said, I want to make a movie about you. And 2 months later, I was with him in Bamako in Mali at the Beating Famine Conference. And that was it. And then for 3 years almost, we've been on and off together in the 11 countries of the Sahel Zone.
That's amazing. The power of conversation. Let's go have a meal. Let's dialogue and let's create an idea. You know, how ideas get birthed. Welcome, Catherine. Lovely to see you. We just want to go over to Arizona. And Pamela Tenable is an amazing executive producer and also director of a documentary called To Which We Belong. And just incredible regenerative agriculture, which we're hearing in the corridors in Glasgow. It's been part of conversation for the UN Food Systems Summit, and really emerging as a solution to have better lens into how we produce the very things that we're dependent on, food. Pamela, you've been working on this film and you produced this documentary, and I saw the clip of it, the trailer. You know, the thing that stuck me the most was the clip, the wording on it that says, the key to our survival is under our feet. Like, how did we miss that? And what inspired you to go that way?
I was inspired by a couple of things, well, many things. One is I've been worried about climate issues forever. I grew up in West Virginia and Midland, Texas, very different climates, oil country in both cases. And how do you, reverse things without destroying our economy? Not that I think we can do that. But long story short, I came across a TED Talk by Alan Savory back in 2013. I think I saw it in 15, and he said we need to change the way we manage lands. And he was talking about the ability of cattle bunched and moving to actually regreen near desert. So I started looking into this thinking, never heard of that. So I am a reader, I'm a researcher, and it was very controversial, right? Everybody knows that. He was maligned. But now we're finding that, in fact, that is the way that we can regreen our good earth. And not only that, but with crops, we have the capability of getting a little bit less off of chemical fertilizers and also pesticides by using cover crops. So we keep plants on the ground year-round, roots in the ground year-round. And I found this absolutely astonishing that we could use green solutions, nature-based solutions, to, in fact, possibly even reverse our legacy load of carbon in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to tell people about it.
You know what? I mean, when I looked at that and I saw the roof being blown off the building, I was like, whoa. I mean, it's a very dramatic clip. And for those of you watching, you have to see, and we're hoping that, people have watched the movies and you're going to be still watching at the Generation Restoration Film Festival in Glasgow. Please check out these movies. They're amazing. You have to really check them out. We now go to that high elevation space that I absolutely love. Greg Gleason, I moved to Switzerland in 1998, and it was the first time I encountered a high elevation mountain. And the first thing that somebody told me was, if you want to see the sun, go to the mountains, learn to ski, which I did. And you've had the opportunity to be that filmmaker of these spaces that are disappearing glaciers, the lost glaciers. My goodness. You have been working on the Last Glaciers film, and you've had many people involved, and you've gone across different regions to really showcase these beautiful spaces, the Mont Blanc, as I mentioned, having lived in Switzerland, Peru, within the Andes, and you worked with the UNEP mountain hero, Malcolm Wood. How amazing. Tell us about that inspiration, those high places.
Yeah, well, I just was in the process of finishing another film called A Plastic Ocean and launching that on Netflix and Amazon and iTunes. And that had taken 8 years. It was a long project that kept going because the questions kept coming up, and it moved from being a marine and oceans documentary into a human health documentary. And I was looking at doing something different. And extreme sports have always intrigued me because I have a deep fear of heights. So I've always wondered how people deal with that mental challenge. So Malcolm and I both lived in Hong Kong at that point. We were good friends, and he was involved with the Plastic Oceans Foundation on the board. And he was involved in a sport called para-alpinism, which is a relatively new sport that involves mountaineering, ice climbing, paragliding. And it was a sport that intrigued me, and we talked about doing a documentary on it. So we went to Europe. And as I arrived in Europe in the dead of winter, there was no snow. The mountains were brown. And the guides and the locals and Malcolm took me up into where these glaciers were supposed to be, and there were no glaciers. Mm. And being with a journalistic background, I started asking questions, and the locals told me that this was something that had been going on for decades. I went and saw the local meteorologist. He said this is a trend that's going to get worse. And it coincided with a talk that I did about a plastic ocean and the single-use plastic issue back in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And at that talk, there was a scientist called Jerome Chapeles who ran the Glacial Institute in Grenoble, the world's oldest glacial institute, and was the head of the Ice Core Memory Project. And he gave a presentation on how by drilling into glaciers all around the world and pulling out these ice cores, they could analyze these frozen bubbles, which contained the atmosphere that existed on the Earth going back 800,000 years. Yeah. And what they were able to see was that the levels of methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and even the temperature. And so they were able to draw a graph that showed this natural oscillation that went like this over 800,000 years as the Earth wobbled on the elliptical orbit around the sun, got closer to the sun, The glaciers melted slightly as it got further away. They built up even more until 160 years ago when the Industrial Revolution started, and this oscillation just hockey sticks off the map. And that was the first time I'd ever seen anyone explain to me climate change in a way that I could understand. Up to that point, the documentaries I'd seen, the stories I'd been told about it was so dense with the science that I thought, it's very difficult for the average person who's not a scientist or doesn't work in the climate space to understand it. But here is the story that everyone can understand, an 8-year-old. And so I went back to Malcolm and I said, look, I think we've actually got a better story and a duty to tell this story of climate change. Mm-hmm. And so for him and I, it was this awakening to the issue. We knew about it and were concerned about it, but we didn't understand it that well. And so we started working with scientists all around the world. And Malcolm, then his job was to train me in para-alpinism to get me up into the glaciers so I could film the scientists. And being frightened of heights, that was a very difficult challenge. But we used that story thread as an analogy to the challenge that faces humanity in overcoming the climate crisis. So people could, who normally wouldn't go and see an impact film about climate, would go and see this film because it contains very exciting extreme sports as well. And Malcolm, as you said, being a UN mountain ambassador, is a great representative for the work that the UN are doing as well.
Absolutely. I saw his picture of him, scaling ice climbing in Kilimanjaro. I was like, wow, the remaining ice sheet. Talking of heights, we're now going to be talking with Corey. Hearing from him, he's an award-winning dancer, choreographer, and filmmaker, and he's been dancing on the rooftops of Hong Kong. Wow, that just seems amazing. Corey, you done the first performance dance in the Antarctica. It must have been cool.
Yeah, it was pretty freezing. I was just complaining before that I was in Glasgow last week for COP and that was cold, but I have to say Antarctica was just a little bit colder.
Oh my goodness. Yes, and you worked on this project recently called Leaders of a New Regime with dancers standing on the top of windmills. Those blades look sharp, and I'm just curious. Tell us a little bit about that. Because that's height. Yes. That is height.
Yeah, no, it was really high. They, so I guess, what you just pointed out is that, I'm a dancer and a choreographer, and I'm definitely not a scientist and a climate change expert or very academic at all. I went to ballet school to create pretty moves. I just want to be very real about that. And I essentially, in my career as a choreographer, started creating dance that would hopefully engage with people and film that would allow people to engage with dance. I come from New Zealand, so I have a very I don't have that elite or class structure. So I feel a bit funny going to the world, big opera houses and it's naturally to me, whether it's geographical, economic, or cultural, a lot of people can't get to opera houses or places like that. So it was really important for me to put high art into places that feel accessible for people to engage with it. That combined, I think, with my love of the environment and involvement of learning about climate change, I started to go, maybe, I can use my art to help viscerally connect people to the climate change story, which, we've all sort of identified can be a bit boring and a bit heavy and a little bit hard to understand. And so I just felt, okay, there's a way to maybe soften people's hearts and minds and connect viscerally to that. So that led us to making the first film in Antarctica, like you mentioned. And after that, I kind of solidified my purpose with the work that I make and going, oh, okay, let's do that. a natural progression, I think, from Antarctica was to put dancers on the top of gigantic wind turbines across the, Scottish Highlands, of which we did a couple of months ago on Folk Renewables wind farm. And we created a short dance film, which is only 3 minutes long, and it actually came out on the internet today, and you can see it as a part of this festival and across online. It's got some amazing dancers dancing across the Highlands and on the top of wind turbines to a new Lord track. And for me, it was about sort of looking at renewables, renewable energy being a key theme in COP26, something that we can all take quite a lot of individual control on, but also just renewables in general, renewable clothing, renewable cups, renewable whatever. There's a buy culture, but I'm really excited about this renewable culture. And that's kind of what the film is. It's about these 9 dancers sort of living in a fairy tale world in the future, hopefully, that maybe can represent the world that we might all live in. I don't know.
I'm glad to talk about, the element of sustainable consumption and how we need to reflect on our consumptive patterns, because obviously, clearly this is really affecting many parts of the world and how we live, as it were, very much to what Craig was talking about with the plastic dynamic and plastic culture. Have you ever seen that ballet movement of the rain dance, or the South African ballet dancer? I love it because she's from the Xhosa heritage that I come from, so I absolutely love it. Now we go to lastly but not the least, of course, and I'll come round to everyone, and I just want to remind everybody who's watching that please send us questions if you're curious. Ask all the speakers a question. I'm sure a lot of you have watched these documentaries and movies or even read the book. I'm now going to go to Catherine. Catherine, welcome. You wrote a book. You're the chief scientist at the Nature Conservatory, actually, and a UN champion of the Earth. And you wrote the book "Saving Us: A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World." Why divided?
I did, because this world is more politically polarized for many of our countries than it has been in our lifetimes. And I'm a climate scientist. I study the physical science. I study those 800,000-year ice core records that Craig was talking about. But I know that what we lack is not more doom-filled facts when the majority of us are already worried about climate change. Even in the United States, 70% of people are worried. 83% of mothers are worried. 84% of young people around the world are worried about climate change. What do we lack? When you ask those people, they say they feel hopeless and they feel helpless when it comes to climate solutions. So that's why I, a climate scientist, wrote a book that has one chapter on the science and every other chapter on how we as individuals and humans, whoever we are, truly can make a difference. Because whoever we are, whether we are a filmmaker, whether we are somebody who works with an organization like World Vision that you mentioned earlier, Volker, whether we are a scientist or a dancer, an artist, someone who invests in agriculture or food or public service, whoever we are, whatever we care about is already being impacted by climate change, and climate solutions can benefit us and our community. So we are already the perfect person to have that conversation with people who share our values, our concerns, our loves, our passions. And we're the perfect person to talk about those solutions. And so that's why I love the diversity of this panel. Because everyone, what we have in common is we're using our voice in our own way to talk about why it matters, where we are, to connect with people over something that we love, something that we share, whether it is a passion for the mountains. And I love the mountains, although I do have a slight fear of heights as well. So I'm with you on both of those. I love watching dancing. I'm not a good dancer myself, but I absolutely love watching shows like So You Think You Can Dance. And I love the way that care for each other and care for what we love is expressed, because climate change truly is an everything issue. It affects every single one of us in ways that matter to us here and now. And there's something that every single one of us can do, and it begins with using our voice to catalyze change. How does change happen? It happens when we use our voice to connect with others, to explain why it matters and to explain what we together can do to fix it. And every single person on this panel is doing that in a different way. They're sharing inspiring solutions. They're creating awareness regarding the problems and the urgency of the issue. And that's really what we need. We don't need more dry science. All we need to understand is this. When we dig up coal, gas, and oil and we burn it, it produces heat-trapping gases. They build up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. Just as you would if someone snuck into your room and put an extra blanket on you when you were asleep. This extra blanket that we are putting around the planet is causing it to warm and is affecting our weather patterns. It's affecting our air, our security, our places, the things that we love. That's what's at risk. And that's why it's not about saving the planet. It's about saving us.
Correct. Yeah. So it's such an important message, saving the human, not the planet. The planet will exist whether we're here or not.
That's the humans and many of the other living things who share this planet with us. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about the cockroaches. They'll be fine. Possums probably also will be fine. But us living things, we're the ones most at risk.
All of you, the element of surprise in your work, something must have surprised you when you got either to a site or you got to, just trying to dig up on your research, Catherine, on your book, or Corey just dancing. I mean, like, maybe I should start with Pamela. What was that element of surprise? Like, you get to the field or you wanted to start work and you're like, whoa, I didn't know this.
Actually, I have an amazing team, so we didn't actually have that many surprises. We do our research. But here's what I would like to say. A lot of people in our country and around the world feel like this is a very divisive topic because of politics. So what surprised me was how I could go to Nebraska, Bladen, Nebraska, which is in the heartland of the U.S., and these guys are wonderful farmers. They've had 3,000 acres in their family for a number of generations. And they're all over this. Let's figure out this thing. They're all excited. Most people don't know that. They feel like, oh, the traditional or conventional, whatever, are bad or they're not on board. This isn't true. So for me, that's the biggest message in my film. It doesn't matter if you go to Bladen, Nebraska, or you go to a 10,000 acre farm that's also family owned on the Maryland shore. Mm-hmm. Again, these guys were like doing quote unquote conventional American farming, but they're like, wow, this works better. Let's get the soil involved. Let's cover the land year round. They're all over it. And not to mention the Maasai cattlemen in Kenya, they're all over it. It doesn't matter where you go. People want to do better. Mm-hmm. They want to take care of their families. They want to take care of their land. They want to take care of their earth. People love this planet.
You mentioned the Maasai. Actually, in Kenya, they were very instrumental in pushing the ban of plastic because they said, we're tired that our cattle are eating these plastics. And obviously, this triggered a whole shift and a change, and it's amazing what the movements and the citizenry and local people. Mm-hmm. Okay, you've had such tremendous experience. I think all of us combined.
Yeah, well, it just recoups what Pamela said. I mean, besides that, I also got inspired by one agronomist, and she got inspired by Alan Savory, whose method and teaching I also know, and there are others like Dennis Garrity. And what you find is indeed in the north of Ghana, in Mali, the same attitude as by now in the Dakotas, where farmers realize that a clean field, as they were taught, taking off all the trees and everything, is the end of agriculture.
Exactly.
Agriculture needs trees. That all of a sudden everybody seems to agree, because every tree stabilizes the land, whereas a clean land, the sun burns it down, then it becomes sandy, and then comes the wind, blows it away, and then eventual rain washes away what's rest, and at the end, what you have instead of soil, you have concrete. And you can change this only through trees. So everybody goes for planting trees, but it doesn't work, because the soil is so poor and there's so little humidity that after 2 years, all these beautiful trees that have been planted over the last 50 years are dead. Otherwise, there would be dense forests. And then comes Tony Rinaudo, who discovered that underground there is a forest dormant, meaning there are still the roots from trees that were cut 30, 40, 50 years ago. And these roots underground, up to 30, 40 meters deep, remain somewhat alive. They only need a signal from the earth. They need that leaves send them carbon dioxide, and all of a sudden they wake up. And they start sending juices up, and then the plants grow. Okay, not going into the detail. But then you can all of a sudden have agriculture on Earth that is being restored. And the most important is not so much the restoration of the soil, it's the restoration of the hope of the people who tried to feed themselves from the soil. And all of a sudden they see it is possible. And for more than 40 years now, Tony Rinaudo has been doing it in Niger, in Mali, I mean, in the most ungrateful lands, you would say. But these soils can be fertile once you come back to other methods of agriculture. And this is what they call the agroforestry, combined with controlled grazing, with intense grazing, but only over a short period of time. That's Pamela's subject, I suppose, and which goes against everything everybody's been taught forever. You know, like the grazing is the animal of the soil, and trees are the enemies of agriculture because you can't go over. Large fields are not interesting because they don't give you enough return on crops. It's the opposite is true. Small is beautiful. Small farmers running small farms on small land, as Asia has been practicing it for thousands of years. And these were the encounters I had to end with small. It was I was not that interested in trees, quite frankly. I grew up in the forest, so a tree goes by itself. It's the small farmholders, the smallholders that are interesting. These farmers, and in the Sahel Zone, there are 350 million people living off less than 1 hectare. Mm-hmm. And that could be a great benefit for agriculture in Africa and the world and elsewhere, if only they could change the methods. So all the studies have been done. As Tony Rinaudo says, you only have to apply it. And to apply it, you have to change mentalities. And so it's, and then ultimately, these trees may change climate, but it starts with changing mentalities. So it's a long process, but everybody can partake.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we are in the UN Decade of Family Farming that was started by FAO. But I just want to go to Corey and Greg as well. The element of surprise. What surprised you in your work? And there's some questions popping in now, actually. I'll have to ask the panelists some questions. What was your element of surprise?
Well, mate, I'll go first if you like. I mean, for me, not being a scientist, I was surprised by everything I was learning. I thought glaciers were just these beautiful things that hung on mountains and you could ski down. And to realize that glaciers hold 30% of the fresh water that we rely on, that there's massive life support system. And that in places, you know, the Himalaya is called the third pole because it has the most ice outside of the poles. And the job that it has to reflect heat and sunlight back into the atmosphere and keep the Earth cool was remarkable. And ICIMOD, which is the scientific organization that is 8 countries in the Hindu Kush region are party to, sent me a report as we were filming in the Andes showing that they'd just been able to verify that the Himalaya had lost 15 to 25% of its ice since the 1990s and was on track to lose 3/4 of its ice by the end of the century if business continues as usual.
As usual, indeed.
And that's remarkable because the Hindu Kush the 10 rivers, the major rivers that the ice melt from the Himalayas feeds into, provide water for 2 billion people in the Hindu Kush region, not only for hydration, but for livestock and cropping, for manufacturing. You know, it's 10,000 litres it takes to make a pair of jeans in Bangladesh. And a lot of these products are sent around the world. So 2 billion people globally are going to be affected, if not already, by the melting Himalaya. And the second, and what that led to with that realization was when we climbed these 6,000 plus meter peaks and stood at the top and looked down at these dying organisms, these dying glaciers, I was overwhelmed by the emotion I felt at witnessing this, which was almost comparable to the emotion I felt when we were opening up the stomachs of dead seabirds and pulling plastic out of them and realizing the stress that these animals must have gone through their lives, and other animals, dying whales on the beach with stomachs filled with plastic. The emotion was almost similar because I was realizing the stress that's being placed not only in humans, but species globally as the water recedes. And we were seeing migration everywhere we went already happening. And that's the biggest threat to ourselves or nation states as a perception, is that people have to move and they're not going to care about borders.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Himalayan region is a very pivotal region. Corey, your element of surprise.
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised by most things really. One of the three things, I guess quickly. One was that when we were looking at this film specifically on the wind turbines, was that in Scotland in 2019, I might get some of these facts wrong, but I think it's 2019, Scotland produced enough energy just from wind turbines alone to power every Scottish home for the next 2 years in 6 months, which is pretty remarkable. And so I guess the sort of optimist in me was like, why aren't we just all moving to renewable energy? Like, let's just go. Like, we can say, let's all be vegetarians, let's cut cars, and let's all make sure we're using renewable energy. Let's do that. And then digging a little bit deeper, I was surprised to learn that, we don't have the technology to store all of this energy yet, or at least the right resources haven't been put into that. So that sort of broke my heart a little bit. So that was surprising. I also, and I have to tread carefully here how I word this, but I was also surprised in the position we found ourselves making a film about essentially I wanted to change hearts and minds about wind turbines, because I was surprised that people still think they're bad and people think that, they, produce 5G or give you cancer. Yeah, aesthetically not pleasing, or, give you cancer, or the sound of them, or they kill birds, and, and all of this stuff, and versus the good, things that they produce. I was surprised to understand that and go, wow, I really, really love them and actually think they're quite beautiful. There's something World of the Wars about them that I'm all here for. And, how can we produce something that feels beautiful and balletic and poetic for these wind turbines? Because they kind of dance by themselves. And then I found the sort of like people and partners we used these films for sort of being cautious politically to make a stance on wind turbines. And I thought, wow, how are we still there? Like, how are we still in this sort of neutral conversation? Like, the science is there. You can't not have an opinion on this. You have to support them. You have to support the idea of renewable energy. And that really surprised me, that we're still in a place where people are politicizing renewable energy.
No, it's really back to the point that Catherine also raised in terms of, this divided world. And Catherine, I know that in an article that you recently did, an interview that you did, you talked about the way we communicate and some of the sort of successes and failures of communication from your experience and how you had to rethink that. I'm very curious to hear from you how you reworked that, because there is a question that's come through about that, which I'm going to ask all of you actually. How did you transcend that?
Well, first of all, I love the question that you're asking about what surprises people, because I ask my students that every week. I want to know what surprised them about what they're learning about climate science, impact solutions, and communication. And I love hearing all the different answers. It's never coming from a different place. And there's a lot that we know about our own area, but a lot that we always learn about others. So for me, as a climate scientist, what surprised me the most in my journey was when I started to learn about the social science of how we as humans interact with information. When I started to look at the polling data of what people actually think about climate impacts and climate solutions. And actually what Pamela said is sort of along the lines of what surprised me. Because I live in the United States, where climate change has been one of the most politically divisive issues for the last 10 years. Since the Obama administration, it has been at the top of the most divisive issues in the country. I'm from Canada, where we had an election this past year. And if you look at who voted for which party, and you compare a map of the country of the election results with a map of is climate changing due to human activities polling question, you see the same patterns. In Canada, you see it in Australia too. You see it in the UK as well. And so these voices are very loud. These dismissive voices saying it's not real, or it's not a big deal, or it's too expensive to fix. They're very loud voices. But what surprised me when I learned that they're a tiny fraction of the population. A tiny fraction. In the United States, they are 7%. In Canada and the UK and Australia, they're actually a little bit less than 7%. And believe me, I hear from them every day on Twitter or Facebook. Not so much on Instagram, people are nice there, but LinkedIn, I hear from them there too. And we hear about them in the media and in the comment section of news articles. We hear about many of them in Washington, D.C., but they are only 7%. And when we talk with the 93% about what real climate impacts look like here and now, affecting things we care about, and when we talk about what real solutions look like, regenerative agriculture, clean energy, cleaner air and water, cheaper electricity, when we talk about real impacts and real solutions, 93% of us are on board. And if we have conversations about that, starting from the heart rather than the head, not starting with doom-filled facts or with guilting and judging people, but simply with saying, I care because I'm a mom. I care because I'm a farmer, because I'm a dancer. I care because I care about mountains. I care because of who I am. And let me tell you about this amazing solution that people are already doing today. And talk about something that's happening in a place where product that you're using, or obviously about something in agriculture that's amazing. Talk about why it matters and what we can do to fix it. And that gets people on board.
Totally agree. I think that the sense I'm getting from all of you is also the point that actually these solutions are fairly obvious. They're staring us in the eyes and we can do something about it. There's a question here. I don't have the name of the person who's asked this question. What's the most impactful an individual can do to fight this climate crisis? Vote responsibly or accordingly, or stop their consumerism, change their diet? What should they do? Any thoughts?
If you don't mind, I wrote a book about exactly that question. And I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say too. For a long time, I was telling people to step on the carbon scales, measure their carbon footprint if they live in a high emitting country, and reduce their personal footprint. But I realized that even if all of us reduced our personal footprint, that is even a fraction of the solution. And so then you feel hopeless. If I could do everything I could and it doesn't matter, why even bother? So then I realized that we each have a footprint, but we have a shadow too. And our shadow is much greater than our footprint. Shadow interacts with and affects the people around us. It reaches through space and through time, through something you write, something that you film, something that you say that's...
Oh, the Glasgow internet is not very good.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry.
Catherine, we're just missing you there. We're losing you, and we're all getting very excited, and we're losing you there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. The shadow. We all have a shadow. I'm getting
a shadow, and you catalyze your shadow by talking about it, talking about why it matters, using your voice.
I would say, if I could jump in there, systemic change is what we need. We need to change the economic and financial paradigms by which we operate. The notion that we can continue with infinite GDP growth on a finite resourced planet is brain damage thinking. And so I say to people, get involved. If you care, go stand in your political field, go to your local municipality, become involved in decision-making, legislative change, because that's where we're going to see it the most. There and in the financial industry, I think they're the two most powerful areas. The financial industry has the big tentacles into government, and they also have very wealthy clients and access to the CEOs and of the corporations, the major corporations that create most of our greenhouse gases. If we can reach those people, then we can move the needle very quickly, and that means getting involved at a political level, becoming a leader with your local NGO, or just in your community.
I have oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, I come back to your question about the surprise. I had an immense surprise. One of the first weeks I was traveling with Tony Rinaldo in Niger Republic, and one of the poorest countries in the world. And he said, Africa can feed itself. Actually, Africa could feed the world with the right methods. Africa is enormous. Africa is as large as North America, Europe, India, and China combined. And there is immense surfaces that could become agricultural again and could be reforested again. And that would change everything. But no development policy goes into agriculture. Everything goes into building or promising heavy industry and things like that. Actually, most of the money remains in the capitals and remains with the political class. One African intellectual told me when I debated with him, could Africa feed the world? And he said, yes, if any of the money that comes into Africa went into agriculture. But in fact, this development money serves to build the surface of a political structure and class as Europeans and Americans imagine a democracy should be. But in fact, these people have no say in the country. Out there, it's the elders, it's the marabouts, it's the spiritual leaders, it's totally different kind of people who have the say. And therefore, the West builds a political facade and feeds it with its money, but the country doesn't change. And Tony Rinaldo has been working in Africa for 40 years almost now. He said, I never, ever saw money come into a village. The maximum is some development, they drill a well, but then you have still the donkey or the people who have to get the water out of it. Only 30% of the population has access to electricity in the sub-Saharan countries, and they have more sun, speaking of renewable energy, than anywhere in the world. All you have in the village is one solar panel with 40 cell phones hanging underneath, to get into the, because they have internet, maybe better than in Glasgow, but they don't have electricity at night to read or to be with their children. They live Africa lives 12 hours per day in the dark. Yeah. These were the things I discovered in the film. So ultimately, it changed my perception of Africa, and I think the movie gives a different image of Africa, and it gives a positive image, an optimistic image, that the people are there, they believe that there is a future, and they would like to work for the future. And all we have to do is focus on the right things, and which is the smallholders, it's just the small land. It's the 2-acre farms and with different methods, not the heavy equipment and so on. You could actually, and if Africa changes, it would have an enormous impact on the climate.
Absolutely. I just wanted to thank Catherine, because I know that you have to jump off and leave. You're about to go, right?
Well, unfortunately, I have 20 more minutes, so we can change the world in 20 minutes.
No, I just wanted to thank you so much. Your book is amazing, and really thank you for your contribution to this voice. And one last word from you, Voice, a word of hope. How should we keep our hopes on before you go?
Action breeds hope.
Go ahead, Catherine.
You first, Katerina.
Yes. I'm sorry. I am at COP. I'm right here in Glasgow. And actually, I don't know if you can... That's the entrance to the negotiation area. So action is what breeds hope. When people feel helpless, that's when they feel hopeless. But when they realize that there's something they can do to make a difference, that's where they understand they're part of the solution. And it begins with using our voice to connect with others, to figure out what we can do wherever we are with our groups, our organizations, our city, our land, the place where we work, the place we live. All of us truly can make a difference. And when we join together with others in action, that's where we find hope. And this panel has been incredibly hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I throw in my hope, my message of hope. I thought that you'd ask me that. Is that I'd almost subtitled it, I've seen happy Africans, meaning that the people in, the people in the villages, when I saw them, I was desperate and I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. We'll never manage to change that. And speaking with them, I found out they've been much worse and they are better. And they see that it's better. And they see that they have 3, 4, 5 times as much harvest than they had in years before, despite the climate change, if they change their methods. And they spread the message to the next village, to the next village. And the best disciples of Tony Rinaldo are actually champion farmers who go around. But that could be helped, this movement. That's all it needs. So that's what I mean. There is a message of hope.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And one of the things that we've noticed as well is that the young people in the African continent are really raising their voice. And I think for those of you in Glasgow, you've seen that how young Africans are just really challenging the status quo, challenging the development models, and really requesting for solutions and better investments because they don't want to inherit a problematic planet. There is a question
Objection. The terrible thing is no young man in Africa wants to stay in the village and be a farmer. And because none of them, because of different reasons, of course, understandable, no African man would like to walk behind an oxen the rest of his life, but especially in general, in the culture, the work on the fields, which is just with a hoe, go out and do that, is considered the lowest human activity. And that was maybe in 19th century in Europe the same when 100,000 emigrated into the New World and all of a sudden saw it can be a fruitful activity. For now, they consider it's not a fruitful activity. It's almost like being a slave. And if that doesn't change, I mean, to reinvent and reteach the nobility of being a farmer, then things won't change.
We would need to bring young people to this conversation at some point. I'll ask the GLF to organize something like that because this is an important conversation because we're seeing a shift in terms of, technology, innovations, of them rethinking, no, we have to do this differently. We cannot continue on this path. I know Pamela and Corey, you have some thoughts in terms of what you think is hopeful. I'm aware that we've got about less than 10 minutes actually. Before I ask a question, your thoughts in terms of where do you see the hope going forward? Corey?
Hopeful. Sort of to answer the question before and this question at the same time about like what is, proactive change, how can you do it? I think it is about making sure that you feel good, that you feel hopeful, and whatever that does, like to be able to write a letter to your parliament, to be able to go say something, you have to feel it. You have to actually experience that yourself. And, I can't read anything and retain it and feel it. That's just not how how I work. I have to do it physically and I have to see it and experience it. So, away from saying go to a dance class, I would say, what makes you inspired to be a part of that conversation? The day that I became a vegetarian, I felt really good because that lowered my carbon footprint. And I felt really proud about that. It was something that I could do every single day. And it allowed me to feel justified in the conversation about about climate change, and therefore feeling good about it and being hopeful about my own individual journey. I then learn more, I then partake in more, I hear more, and then my journey develops out from that. So I think for anyone, it's find out what works for you and feel good about it.
Indeed. Pamela?
Well, I think that despite our history of financing the large organizations and institutions, that there are people working on the ground, NGOs, and also financial institutions who are understanding that our farmers, 70% of our calories come from small plot farming. Okay, 70% of the world's calories. So there are people who are doing innovative ways to reach those small farmers. I could name a couple of groups that are doing it, and people can look into these groups and support them. That you don't have to go out and be a farmer yourself. You can actually research the folks who are doing this work on the ground now and doing it well and reach those dollars. I think there's some kind of $2 billion commitment to Africa, and I forget the organization, but it's on the ground now. And a lot of it will go to the people who are working with the land. Agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, etc. So things are changing, and I'm very hopeful about that. However, having said all of that, you just can't sit there and go, woe is me, I have no ability to make a farm, and I don't want to be politicking and all these things. There's ways. So do your research. There's the Nature Conservancy is doing amazing work. A group called Acumen is in Africa doing amazing work. There's so many groups, and they're doing the work. You can go find out what they're doing and go volunteer with them.
There's a question here because I really want to respect the fact that there's an audience out there and they're asking some questions. There's a question from Wally Graber, and Wally, I hope I pronounced your last name properly. If you had 30 seconds to share a connected story with someone, what would you convey to help them understand the crises and the importance of your work? 30 seconds, starting with you, Craig.
I'd send them to our teaser. Watch the teaser.
Watch the teaser, Greg says. Volker, 30 seconds.
I couldn't even put it into 90 minutes of a movie. But there are solutions. That's what I learned from Tony. I've seen them. There are solutions. There is no reason for despair.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Corey.
I would probably opt out from 30 seconds of text and do 30 seconds of interpretive dance that would connect you to the theme. That would probably involve some sort of greenery and some cool dance moves. That's what I would probably do.
That I would watch. Probably more than my teaser, to be honest.
Pamela.
I would say, as a mother, that it is vital to me that my great-great-great-grandchildren be able to live on this planet and see the wonder that I have experienced. Mm-hmm. And it is vital that we recall that it's not about us. It's about the next 7 generations. And it's also, we live in a beautiful place. So I would send poems, and I would also send them to these folks who are doing the actual work that has solutions. People I know are in despair. That's not okay.
Indeed. As Roman Krznaric in his book said, you have to be a good ancestor. There's a last question here from Joy Arabomem. I think she's from Nigeria. What is your view on the role of Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledge towards contributing to climate action? Anyone?
Good question.
Critical. I mean, most of the biodiversity that's left on the planet, remember, 68% of biodiversity has disappeared in my lifetime. That's a terrible, and Pamela's talking about legacy. The only thing we do leave is our immortality through our genetics to our kids and their kids. And that's our one legacy. And yet we've destroyed all that biodiversity, and the biodiversity that's left is there because of Indigenous peoples and their ability to understand how important they are as part of the life support system for all species. Critical, absolutely critical. And that's the kind of recognition that we've been trying to get here at COP26 for Indigenous populations around the world.
Indeed, indeed. Anyone else?
I would agree with you, Craig, but I would also say that the Indigenous knowledge needs to be understood by the quote-unquote more Western world so that it can be put into play more easily. So there has to be a dialogue, more of a dialogue. But yes, I absolutely agree. And we need to hear these folks, but we need to have platforms where we can hear them and make decisions from those. Absolutely.
Great. Corey, any last thoughts about that before we close?
There's in New Zealand we have the Māori, our Indigenous culture, and we have a word called Kaitikitanga, which is a word that basically represents, in loose translation, it's like responsibility for the environment. And you don't have to look so far back to a group of people, an incredible people who actually lived off the land and cherished it and respected it and believed in it. And there's just, to me, in Western development, we've sort of ignored all that. And it's sort of, it's all there for us to, learn from and look back at and go, oh, let's take this back and own that. And yeah, I find it very inspiring, actually.
Very good.
I would throw in another African word, from Tanzania, Kisikihai, which means living stump. That's how they call the natural regeneration of trees, living stump. And we may consider that the nature or large parts of the nature right now look like stumps, but these stumps are living. And this underground forest can come to the surface again. And wherever there is desertified land, and it's 2 billion hectares apparently on the planet, it could be regreened. And that is a beautiful thing to do. And you see it from one year to the other. And it's a very, very hopeful message.
Right. No, I really want to thank you all, Pamela, Corey, Craig, Volker. I just want to thank you. And Catherine, of course, has had to dash away to the negotiations. I just want to sincerely thank you for being part of this amazing discussion. Your work is impressive. It's just incredible. And I just want to let the audience know that there's going to be a special preview of The Last Glaciers online for more than an hour. I think within the hour before it hits the cinemas and IMAX next year. So you have a special moment to actually see it. So please stay on and watch and check out and see the other movies and I really want to thank
and watch The Forest Maker when it comes to a theater near you.
The Forest Maker is coming to you. Watch, the dance, the work that you've all done, Which We Belong, work by Pamela. I mean, this is amazing. This is just the A-list team. I'm deeply grateful for your time. And for all of you who've been watching around the world, we want you to be the change you want to see in your communities. And it's really exciting because we have just this one planet, the one place we call home. This is it. This is all we have. Thank you so much, and wishing you all a lovely and beautiful time, and be safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.